Right. Now joined by our friend and comrade, Nando Vila. How you doing, Nando?
Doing well. Doing very well. Glad to be on the stream. How's everyone in the stream doing? Everyone's doing good. That sounds great.
Yeah. For anybody who's sad because Cale Brooks isn't here, Cale will be joining us, but probably a little late. Yeah.
I'm the backup to Cale. This is very embarrassing. You know, I should have been informed. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have agreed to do this.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so obviously we want to watch the Greenwald conversation and then talk about that. But first, we have a sad piece of news to announce. The former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who we all respect and admire a great deal, recently tragically passed away at the age of I can't keep this up. Fuck that guy. Rod in hell.
Yeah, it's amazing how I forgot about him. I just he's not one of these old guys who's remained active. He's not like Kissinger who pops up every once in a while with an op-ed talking about our strategic interests in Micronesia or whatever. But he's been pretty quiet as of late, so I hadn't thought about him. And thinking about just how old these people are and how long they live. I mean, we know Rumsfeld, he was Secretary of Defense under Bush and Iraq War and all that stuff, but Rumsfeld was Secretary of Defense for Gerald Ford also, which is just it's forever ago. How old was this guy? He's been around forever.
88 is how old he was. One of the stupid little factoids that's in all the obituaries of him is that he was the youngest person ever to become Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford, and then he was the oldest person ever to become Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush, which, whatever. It's the whole thing, every time I read one of these obits, I always think, just imagine an obituary like this for somebody else who committed serious war. Yeah, right. It was all about Pol Pot's office management style and how many memos he wrote, or do you know Saddam Hussein was only 42 years old in 1979 when he officially became president of Iraq?
When he assassinated everyone in what did Saddam Hussein do? He did something crazy on live TV, executed half of parliament and declared he was the youngest person to ever do that.
Yeah, that's right. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records. Yeah, exactly.
I thinking about Rumsfeld today, as we all are, it just brought back the brutality and awfulness of the Bush administration in a way that, has been kind of forgotten by a lot of liberals, right? I mean, this is kind of I'm not breaking any new ground on the left. I mean, I think this is a common kind of refrain that the sort of liberal rehabilitation of the Bush administration. But you do, even if you're on the left and that intellectually, you move on in your life and you kind of, and then when you stop and think about it, you're like, man, what a group of absolute psychopaths who weren't just psychopaths and did a lot of talk like the Trump administration, but actually kind of walked the walk. They fucking did it. They fucking did it. And I mean, that's what just always hits me whenever I see one of these cretins pop up in the news again. It's when you stop and think about it, I was like, man, that really did change the world, probably for good, for worse for the worse in a way that is hard to think of another single ruling administration in a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he was Secretary of Defense when the United States invaded Afghanistan, which is the longest war in American history. We're still in Afghanistan. I was writing this afternoon a Jacobin piece about Rumsfeld, and I got curious and did a quick Google search for a wedding party bomb to see when the most recent time I could find when it had happened, and it was a month ago.
Jesus.
And this is almost 20 years after the United States invaded Afghanistan. He was Secretary of Defense when the United States invaded Iraq. and and of course all the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, which is still having like all kinds of like spiraling bloodshed and chaos like around the Middle East now, that stem from that. He was Secretary of Defense with the United States, just started openly torturing people and and not like, having it be something that was alleged to have happened and like but like openly like going on CNN and saying,
this is what we got to do it. We got to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to do it. I mean, it's like, I know it's hack as fuck to like, cite Orwell or whatever in this kind of thing, but like, hearing you talk about Afghanistan, it's like, that we'll always be at war with whatever it is. What does he say? Like, we'll always be at war with East Asia or whatever. Like the fact that that's like, that is our reality, I mean, we're in theory getting out, but it strikes me as like we're not really getting out. We're not really.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's supposedly it's September. We're getting out. Whether that actually A happens and B, if it does happen, whether that actually means like the United States is not engaged in any kind of war in Afghanistan, or whether it means that there are like bases that are like slightly outside of Afghanistan that we're using to bomb Afghanistan. We'll see. But I mean, I don't.
But you're already seeing Steve Cole, he on the New Yorker, like his latest thing. I just, for no other reason that I was on the New Yorker website to read an article about something else, and then I just saw like the little headline to the left, and it was like the women and children that we're leaving behind in Afghanistan. Like they're still trying to manufacture consent for our continued endless troop presence there. It's like, well, what do you think about like we're going to leave these people at the mercy of the Taliban? Like, what are we supposed to, like, we can't do that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, on some level, like there's truth to that, but like, what are we supposed to, like, we just going to be there, like we're just going to be killing their people there forever? I mean, I did a Jacobin thing about that Intercept story that was just absolutely wild, about CIA trained death squads just like going into schools and murdering children willy-nilly. Like, we're supposed to do that, like forever? It's just, at some point you just got to cut your losses and get the fuck out.
No, absolutely. Like the idea that there's going to be some point in the future when things have changed in such a way that, that like can leave Afghanistan and there's not going to be a Taliban and there's not going to be any of that stuff is just weird and delusional. I mean, it's like, I mean, if nothing else too, I mean, like, I mean, how is it that you can find people who are going to fight for the Taliban in Afghanistan because it's like, well, you're going to get a never-ending supply of volunteers if you have people who have family members, who've been killed by the American military and and the Afghan, client state. I mean, or for that matter, I mean, fortunately, the threat of domestic terrorism was always really overhyped. But I mean, every time there is some sort of plot that, whatever, 3/4 of the time it was like a, FBI instigated plot, but like every time there's some kind of plot, and somebody's arrested for planning to, set off a bomb in Times Square or something, and they actually get their day in court. Every single time, what they always say, if you read the transcript, is, I did this to avenge all of the people who were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq and all that stuff. So, it's self-perpetuated. I mean, if you don't just cut your losses and leave at some point, then 20 years, 50 years, whatever. I mean, there's no reason it couldn't still be going on then. Yeah.
I watched Battle of Algiers last night. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's pretty remarkable. But it shows the struggle between the FLN and the French colonial rule in Algeria in the 1950s. And like, so the villain is the French paratrooper colonel, but he's in a way like perfectly honest. Like the sort of liberals and the press and stuff like that are the ones deluding themselves. But he's like, listen, you all agree. We disagree on a bunch of political stuff, but like you agree on the fundamental question that we need to stay in Algeria. If you agree with that, like this is what I got to do. All right, like this is what it looks like. Like at a certain point, if you don't like any of this stuff, then we got to get the fuck out. But like, if you want us to be there, like it is brutal, it is violent, it is killing women and children, it is, like if that's what it is, that's what occupation entails. And if you don't like it, then you have to get out, even if you do leave some people behind, quote unquote. If not, you're just perpetually doing that. Like, I mean, there's just no scenario in which, like you said, that the Taliban is just like, you know what, that's fine. Just,
never mind, guys. I see this is all a big misunderstanding. Like we surrender. We're just not going to exist anymore. You won. I mean that won't happen. Any circumstances under which like that could actually cease to exist would be ones where the United States was no longer part of the equation.
Right.
But the dude that we're about to watch, we can transition unless we want to take a second to celebrate that Bill Cosby is finally free.
Well, yes, we did it. We did it. Yeah. Thanks to this show. Thanks to the hard work that you
advocacy for free
exactly.
Cosby.
Exactly. It was the GTAA version of Lula Libre. Like this is what you guys have been. You and the community have been on top of this one from day one when the mainstream media had moved on from this injustice. You guys stayed on top of it, and congratulations to you.
Imagine
Bill Cosby's out.
The mirror universe of like the mirror universe version of TMBS, where that actually was like the big cause, like Lula, was free.
I mean, it sounds like a bit. Yeah, it sounds like a Michael bit. To be honest,
it does. Look, we're pretty sure the 250 women who accused Bill Cosby are all lying.
Or it's like I thought you were against mass incarceration, especially of black males in American society. Yeah, are you not against mass incarceration?
Yeah. But on the slightly more admirable one of those two, the one about freeing Lula, one of the people who was most instrumental in making that happen, of course, is Glenn Greenwald, who has been published the leaks with the Intercept Brazil that led to the charges against Lula being rescinded. And Sergio Moro having to step down, and all of that stuff, and that's what he spends a lot of his time on. I think it's something that a lot of Americans are not super focused on because we've sort of got our view of politics that's like primarily about like battling American cable news shows and stuff. But I think it's something that whenever we talk about the guy, it's always worth remembering that. And if you read his book, Securing Democracy, about what's happened in Brazil in the last couple of years, you can watch my interview with him about that from, I don't know, time blurs together, but a few months ago. Then we talk about that. But we are talking about American politics in the conversation that I had with him that went up on his Substack on Saturday. And specifically, we're talking about my new book. And so as part of that conversation, we agree on a lot of things about, some of what's wrong, with the left and, and all of that. And we also disagree on other things as you'd expect. So I want to play that and then we can talk about that.
Let's do it.
All right.
Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Glenn.
Absolutely. So whenever I talk to or interview a person who has a newish book out, as you do, I always, not always, but often ask the same question as the first question, which comes from my own experience of writing books and all of the misery and difficulty that entails, knowing how hard it is to write a book and knowing that nobody writes a book without some really good, compelling reason to do so. So I generally ask, what is it that impelled you to write this book? Like, why did you think this book was something that was worth all that time and energy that had to go into it. But I want to amend that question, or at least like maybe add to it in your case.
Sure.
Which is, I think in general, it's always easier if you're writing a political book and you're a political person associated with a particular political faction, as you are. I think, it's fair to say you're kind of associated with the Bernie DSA left, without putting you in a box too quickly, but just roughly speaking, it's always easier to write a book that basically is either designed to say, here's why this faction is amazing and awesome and fantastic and emergent and ascending,
right?
Or to say, here's why the enemies of my faction are evil and menacing and need to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And not only is it easier to write a book like that, but it's also easier to market, easier to convince people to read it, because you're connecting to the thing they want. And what you did was the exact opposite. As a leftist, you wrote a book basically designed to critique not even the Democratic Party or modern establishment liberalism, which is a different faction, but the faction to which you belong. The subtitle of your book is even, what is it? A critique of the contemporary left is the subtitle of your book. So you're essentially saying to your own kind of listeners, audience, colleagues, comrades, I'm writing a book to explain what's wrong with us, which is really hard to do. So let me ask the general question, which is, why did you think you needed to write this book? And then why did you decide to climb that mountain?
Yeah. So as you said, I mean, I definitely have a very definite, team that I, identify with. I am, DSA gets some money from me every month. I'm on the masthead of Jacobin. So why I wrote this was extreme frustration with the things that it seemed to me that people who, broadly speaking, have my political goals were doing, in ways that they were acting that strike me as just fantastically counterproductive to actually achieving those goals. Not least the fact that people react so badly to any sort of internal criticism, right? Like the late Michael Brooks had a great line on the weekend show he did it on at Jacobin, Fan Kasparian, where he said that it's that saying somebody is against the left because they're criticizing is like saying that a basketball coach is against his team because he makes them do drills. Like it's bizarre on that level. And part of what I was trying to figure out in the book is why it is that we act that way. So I'll just give you one small example that's not in the book of the kind of thing that made me think there was a real problem here, which was a personal example that I had. So Jordan Peterson is somebody who I have spent tons of time criticizing, the things that I think that he's wrong about, his defenses of traditional hierarchies and etc. And I actually co-wrote a book that was partially about defending him, etc. But when he went,
you mean that was about critiquing him? That was about criticizing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. But when he went to rehab, and I read the article about him going to rehab and how he'd started to have issues with dependence on prescription medication, after his wife had a cancer diagnosis, and I tweeted out what should have been the most anodyne possible thing, which is I could not disagree with Jordan Peterson more, but it sounds like he's in a very bad place. I hope he gets the help he needs and he successfully recovers, which is should be the least controversial thought that's ever crossed my mind. And I had a surprising number of people who were saying that they were disgusted with me because of my expression of solidarity with this bigot, and that I had said that I feel bad for him, that there are people who I care about who've had drug issues, and I feel bad that he's going through this, and I hope that I hope he recovers and gets the help that he needs. And it was sort of shocking because I've certainly had people pile on me and denounce me over nonsense before, but oftentimes in this case, with people I really wouldn't have expected to, and I thought, really, because of this, right? What's going on here? And there was a sort of series of incidents that happened, including some while I was writing the book, that made me think that there was a larger issue here. Like, for example, one in you mentioned Bernie earlier. During the 2020 presidential campaign, Joe Rogan said on his show, a guest asked him, he was very wise, asked him who's going to vote for. He said, "Oh, probably Bernie. I think he's a good guy." And he had like a minute where he's talking about Bernie Sanders. And the Bernie campaign did the obvious thing. It's the most popular podcast on the planet. It's a vast audience, not very political people who are not necessarily going to vote in the Democratic primary, and cut it up, put it out as a little clip. And a lot of people got very upset at him,
including AOC.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, that she that was like behind the scenes, but apparently AOC had an issue with that. That he was touting the endorsement of this not a word I heard a lot before in my life. I heard a lot then, touting the endorsement of this terrible person, Joe Rogan, and that really made me start to wonder. Because when I think about that, or I think about like even something like as like relatively trivial as it is, so even something like the notorious clips from the 2019 BSA convention of one person, of people being told they weren't allowed to clap, because there could be like 3 people, not 1,000, who had some particular noise sensitivities, and one person is yelling at everybody about the clapping, and they use the phrase "Hey guys," and somebody else says "Hey guys" is gender language. And I look at all this, and I think something fundamental has gone very wrong here. And it seems to me that what it is that far too many people who nominally agree with my political goals, who want to, give everybody health care, and, give working people, more power, at the workplace and outside of it, and end the wars and all that good stuff. In practice, what they're doing doesn't seem to be about trying to build the most appealing version of left so they can convince as many people as possible to actually build a majority movement to bring about those goals that they supposedly care about. What they seem to be doing in practice is this mode of politics that's much more about the moral evaluation of individuals and deciding whether other people are really good enough to be in the club. And from the perspective of actually trying to achieve those goals, it's the most counterproductive thing that you could possibly do. Most people who aren't immersed in the left political subculture get one look at that and run screaming in the opposite direction, or roll their eyes and move on, maybe to be less dramatic about it. So I think that it's something we really need to think about, how it is that we ended up acting this way, and why we should stop, and what we could do different. And and I think the title of the book makes it clearer that this is, it's taken from the first chapter where I talk about comedy, but it's also a expression of frustration. Like this is stuff that drives me crazy, and I want us to stop, and I want to try to get across get across the sense that there's a real problem here, and we need to take it seriously.
So there's a couple things you said that caught my attention that I want to drill down a little bit on. And one of them is something that occurred a lot to me as I was reading the book. The other one is something that I more thought of now as you were just speaking. So let me begin with one of them, which is this idea that, kind of the fundamental premise of your book, that the left is not really succeeding, right? Like that there's these goals that you say that you share with people that you regard as your political allies. And I want to ask about that next, like whether you really do have common goals with the people you think you do, or have assumed in the past maybe that you do. But And then it's not really succeeding because there's certain things wrong with the movement. And so it's time for some self-critique, which any political movement, any institution ought to do. There's kind of a countervailing view to that, which is actually the American left is stronger now than it's been in, I would say, decades, probably going back to, I think you'd probably have to go back to the 1960s when at least like the counterculture left made such an impression, when there were mass movements against the Vietnam War and in favor of civil rights, in terms of like an active left, like a loud active left that cannot be ignored. When I started writing about politics in 2005, I mean, you couldn't count on, you would probably need just one hand to count the number of people who you could identify as prominent left-wing voices, say, in Congress, let alone like the institutional left. And I think a lot of people, especially people who aren't on the left, it's like this weird phenomenon I've noticed. It's not all unique to the left, which is that every political faction always believes that they're always on the losing side of things. Everyone always believes that their faction is losing everything, that they have no power, that they're always oppressed, right? It's almost maybe something tribal that is in us. But I think when you look at the left, when you look at obvious things like the number of elected members of Congress who would say like identify openly with the Democratic Socialists of America, what are there, like maybe 8 to 10 of them, as opposed to 1 or 0 before. The fact that the Bernie movement in 2016 almost took down the Clinton machine, and probably would have had the DNC not cheated, and came very close again in 2020 had Obama not done his magic. But on top of that, success in local races, success in state races, and just like a very kind of influential presence in the culture wars as well. I mean, I think, you would have to say that when it comes to the culture wars, the left seems to be winning on marriage equality and trans issues and abortion and those kind of things. What's your argument for why the left isn't succeeding?
Yeah, so I guess I would disaggregate a couple of things. Like I think that some of those social issues that you mentioned, there has been tons of progress on them, partially because I think the culture war moves on. The line of scrimmage changes. I saw there's a poll the other, within the last week or two. In fact, I think I saw you post it. That like 55% of Republicans, are fine with same-sex marriage now.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes, as some of the social and cultural battles are lost, by social conservatives, they'll move on to new things, and those certainly are. I mean, both of those examples. I mean, there certainly are, welcome bits of social progress from my perspective. Although I think it's also worth noting that those aren't advances that particularly threaten the bottom line of the most powerful people in our society, right? I mean, like whether which is not to say that they're inconsequential or I don't care about them. I do, but it's just not the case that whether Goldman Sachs is going to have black, gay, trans people in certain positions or not, that they're going to make just as much money one way or the other. That doesn't really impact them. In fact, if anything, in some ways, I know that on the left we sometimes really want it to be the case that all the things that we don't like are marching in the same direction, so we can have a kind of unambiguous moral judgment. But in some ways, it's actually good for capital to get past certain kinds of arbitrary prejudices, because that way you can just work as an efficient machine, best person for the job, without worrying too much about stuff like that.
Or it's like it was like when the military first integrated racially and then integrated in terms of allowing openly gay people to serve. It probably was the thing that strengthened that institution the most, right? Because it made it so that the military is a lot more powerful and a lot more popular if they're not just a straight white male institution, but now we're an institution that throws open its arms to first black people and then women and then gay people and now trans people. Same with corporation. It strengthens those institutions. It doesn't weaken them.
Totally, but of course, again, it's yeah, exactly, and it's going to be very cold comfort if you're if you live in a village in Afghanistan that's going to be bombed, that that you're now being bombed by a vastly more diverse military. So, which again doesn't mean that discrimination isn't bad or that ending it isn't good. But I think it is also worth maintaining that larger perspective. That even when we're talking about real legal advances for equal rights and dignity that matter, even when we're talking about that, it doesn't really impact their bottom line. It doesn't really hurt these institutions. Doesn't change the balance of power on that global military level you're talking about. Certainly doesn't change the economic balance of power at home. Much less cases where we're not really talking about substantive advances for that kind of like extensions of that 60s rights revolution, but instead we're just talking about performative gestures, which is what when people talk about like the left being ascendant and culture wars, it seems to me that what they're really talking about is you having the same forces that have always held power continuing to hold power, but doing so at the same time as making a lot of empty performative gestures in the directions of racial inclusivity, or making people go to trainings or other things like that that don't actually have much impact on anything in the real world. I mean, I think when it comes to if by the left you mean the Bernie movement, the DSA attempts to create things like universal health care, to much less interventionist foreign policy, et cetera, then I think that what you're saying is half right. That it is certainly true that things are much better now than they were, like unfathomably better now in many ways than they were in 2005. I remember 2005. It was dismal. What I would argue is not that there haven't been advances. There certainly have been. That you go from having one person, Bernie Sanders, in either house of Congress, who called himself a socialist, to now we're up to 10 or whatever. Although the other 9 are in the House. That's an advance. The fact that Bernie came so close to the presidential race, that's an advance. The fact that the DSA, sure, might be the biggest, far left organization since SDS or something. But at the same time, my argument would be that we have a lot of bad habits left over from a time when the left was so much more marginal than it is now, that it was really tempting to see what you were doing less as a concrete project to change the real world, and more as a kind of symbolic performance of moral opposition to the many very real injustices around us, right? Like I love Noam Chomsky, but there's never a point where you're reading a book by Chomsky and like on page 97 or something, he says, oh, if a socialist government took power, here's how it handled the situation I'm talking about. And that's not even necessarily, I mean, I think given the time, the political period in which he spent most of his life, I think that's understandable. It'd sound like saying, when I become emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'll do.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of that same mindset persists now. And I worry that despite those very real advances that you're talking about, it imposes a really hard upper limit, because I'm not, particularly content with having, you have 10 people who are sort of informal left caucus, within Congress, and another 425 people who are not like that. Democratic leadership that remains implacably opposed to Medicare for all, implacably opposed to having to pulling back, the U.S. empire overseas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I mean, like I'd like to not just be a minority but real presence that exists. I'd prefer to actually win some of these battles. And I worry that the way that a lot of people on the left makes that much less likely.
Okay, so that's exactly the question.
Hot takes from Ben Burgis.
extremely hot. The heat was as hot as the beach in Rio de Janeiro on a hot summer day. Posto Nova in Ipanema, porra. I can speak Portuguese.
Yeah. All right.
Cale's Argentine, so he hates Greenwald because Cale's Argentine, and he hates all Brazilians and anyone who is a Braziliophile. So yeah,
I'm a pretty vulgar nationalist, as people know. I mean, but that's like
you're like the Falklands. Are you fucking kidding me? They're called las Malvinas.
No, they're ours. You know, the fucking Brits. I'm kind of hoping that the Brits lose the Euro just because of the Falklands. So
totally.
Thanks, Silver. I mean, I think a lot of like what Ben's like point in this answer right now that we just watched. I mean, this is like a lot of the distinction. I'm thinking a lot of like, for instance, like the post-colonial world, basically like the left after like 1950. And so, thinking of decolonization, but also, I think it's like the civil rights movement actually kind of fits into this history as well, where you get kind of elites among oppressed people. You get, in a lot of the colonized world, the people that are first pushing back against empire end up being like what we now think of like PMC, like professionals and like managers and a lot of like lawyers. And their issue with empire, a lot of it ends up coming down to like, we don't get what we deserve. We should be getting more, and the empire restricts us in that. And so we want to like push back against the empire. And the imperial countries say, fuck you, I don't give a shit. And it's only when you get mass movements, when you get ordinary working people fighting against empire, or in the US fighting against Jim Crow, for instance, when you get like the capacity of ordinary people to fight back is when these regimes end up falling. And that's a crucial distinction, because what the elites are pushing for is effectively identity politics. It's nationalism. It's saying we in around the world in decolonization, it's we the brown people should rule our own countries, not these white imperialists. But what they want is we the brown people should be dominating other brown people. That we should maintain systems of domination and exploitation and oppression, but we should be the one doing it. We should be the victors of this. And they only reluctantly end up saying yes to working class people entering into this, because they end up becoming key to overthrowing empire. But then they end up saying, yeah, let's not go too far. We're only getting so much in this arrangement. And this is, I think, although this seems maybe a little esoteric, but this is like the history of the last 50, 60 years, that we're now at the end of this process where so much of what is considered radical and what is considered the left ends up becoming just the priorities and the interests of the elite members of whether it's in this country, it's like the black PMC ends up dictating what black politics means. And the same phenomenon has happened globally, where ethnic elites claim, I'm going to claim what's in the best interest of the nation or something. It's what Ben is saying is, you have to maintain a class analysis. You have to this is why Marxism remains and will always remain a vital aspect of our politics as long as we're in capitalism, because the fundamental divisions in capitalism are on class over those who are exploited and those who exploit. And that's how the left has to orient its politics if we want to win it again.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, I don't know, Glenn seemed to be playing a little bit of devil's advocate when he was pushing back on your statement that, that the left kind of was out of power and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know that he was like, just being a interviewer and kind of just trying to present a counter point, playing devil's advocate, or he actually believes it, that, look at the left has won all these victories in the culture war. And,
Right.
that's a thing. And it's like, I think that is a, that is a recurring theme in his work often is a focus on the culture war, and I think that something that we at Jacobin, for example, I would say Cale and I, and you, Ben, I think as well, is that we are kind of sick and tired of the fucking culture war. There's culture war all the time. I hate the fucking culture war. Like, make it stop. And you know, I try as best I can to avoid it at all costs. You know, to the extent that I weigh in on it every once in a while, it's like in a half joking way. I never seriously engage in whatever culture war dust up is happening in the moment.
There was that month when you were crusading against Hilaria Baldwin stealing Spaniards.
I still am on that. She posted Instagram story yesterday saying, "Oh, look, me and my babies are all different colors."
Awesome.
I love her. I must have gotten retweeted by some like semi-influential Spanish account because I got a bunch of Spaniards like in my mentions being like, I can't believe this fucking bitch. And I'm like, I just wanted to tell like all of them, like, you're not actually offended. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, there is no injury here at all. This is just funny. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to Cale's point, I mean, in the conversation did for patrons last week with Roberto Asfalm, who co-written a article with Cedric Johnson about the NFL race norming thing, and he was kind of talking about how, like, even though in a way it's like weird old school racism, in a different way, some of what the NFL is doing, like how they got away with this, has to do with lines that liberals have taken in culture war contexts and in discussions about race, where they sort of jam together everybody with the same identity characteristics as being in a category for every purpose. So as if like a black NFL player had more in common with the experience of a black janitor than with a white NFL player, right? You know, like right. In that context. And he had a really good line in that discussion that Cale's thing made me think of, about how, you know, the sort of very cliched but also true and important thing to say about what's wrong with the biological version of racial essentialism is that there's more genetic variation, you know, within so-called races than between them. But of course, the equally important point is that there's more sociological variation within so-called races than between them. I mean, just because other people look like you or share other identity characteristics, you know, with you, you know, doesn't mean that you have the same interests, and there might be like localized areas where you have the same interests, maybe in overcoming certain forms of discrimination. But like, again, if we're going to talk about like what's been a victory for the left, right? Like, okay, do we just mean for like some sort of laudable social progress in terms of like, you can't discriminate against people in this way or that way anymore? Yeah, sure. There's been tons of that, and that's great. I'm for it. But like, that's not the same thing as a victory for the left in the sense of a victory for the working class.
Yeah, Cale and I are both white Hispanics, and we agree on nothing. We hate each other and agree on zero.
Deeply.
We're both white Latinx adjacent. But yeah, I mean, I think that. Listen, I think that material politics has been in a kind of state of standstill for decades. You know, like there hasn't been a serious redistributive policy that has passed in the United States in decades. In fact, it's just been kind of the opposite direction, slowly, you know, being whittled away. And so, and that has created a situation in which all politics seems like this other stuff, like that's what's politics. That's what politics is, you know. And in that kind of incredibly narrow realm, like if the material stuff is all kind of out of bounds, like that is 98% of what quote unquote politics should be. But that's off the table. We cannot ever hope. I don't want to say ever, but we can't hope in the you know, the near term to change that. So then, you know, we're stuck in this situation where we're fighting about all this other stuff. And in that kind of incredibly narrow fight, it is true that social liberalism, kind of the end of de jure racism. You can't say black people are lazy, and I'm just asking questions about it, anymore. Which you used to be able to. Okay, yeah, that's a victory, but like it's a somewhat hollow victory because that other big chunk of politics, of what really politics is, has been relegated to the sidelines entirely, just because of the nature of how capitalism has evolved in the last 30 or 40 years.
Right. Well, and it's also it's kind of scary because I just got off of, we did the Jacobin show earlier tonight with Naveddeh Mujamdar, which you should watch. It's a great episode. But part of the discussion earlier on, we played this clip that was doing the rounds, and actually I saw it because of Ben, so I know Ben has seen it, of a teacher in New York, maybe a professor, but an educator in New York, who is making the case for why, her explanation for why, African American students don't do as well.
Oh, Jesus, I remember this.
Yeah. So on certain academic criteria, I believe, and she's basically like, she says that like, well, African American students don't do as well with critical thinking and effectively with like math skills, because those are Western concepts, and African Americans are a relational kind of people. That
did the Muslim world invent math? Like, who am I wrong about this? Like,
no, you're 100% right about that.
Okay, you're right, but it's just
I blurted it out without like it being, I was like 70% sure.
Well, that's why we pay you money at Jacobin.
Yeah, that's why I'm here to deliver the knowledge, baby.
Yeah, but just the it's like, it's insane. It's like this idea that like basically Black people or people from the quote unquote the East have a totally different way of perceiving the world, and they think in different terms, so much so that they don't understand rationality. Or the typical argument that was made is that they don't understand democracy. This was literally the justification for colonialism. Like, this is the ideological explanation of like why these people deserve to be treated inferior.
That's what people in Miami say about Cuba.
Yeah, like this is old school.
That's why they don't rise up. That's why they don't rise up and overthrow the Castros, because they're afraid of taking responsibility for their affairs.
Yeah, but right. And by the way, yes, before people start coming at me for this, I understand lots of parts of math were invented in lots of places. None of them, by the way, Western Europe, but whatever. But lots of it was in the Muslim world. But yeah, like the explanation, like this is so insane that like in the guise of hyper wokeness, this explanation is, it's not like, Black people are more likely to be poor than white people in like bigger disproportionate numbers because of the legacy of de jure racial apartheid in the United States. And, there are massive educational disparities between poor people and middle class people. And that's not the explanation. The explanation is, non-white people have different ways of knowing.
Right.
Like
it's the real horseshoe theory. That's the real horseshoe theory out there. It's the wokes. The wokes get in bed with like Richard Spencer, in their thinking.
Right, and they think that the conservative argument is that like differences. Obviously, there's differences. There's cultural differences. There's people have different traditions. People look a little different. Obviously, all of that's real. But like the conservative argument is that it goes all the way down to like fundamentally like different kinds of human epistemologies is like the technical term, but different ways of understanding the world around them. And again, like that is the conservative argument to say, there's like a horrifying video that exists of General Westmoreland, who was one of the main, generals during Vietnam. There's an interview in a movie called Hearts and Minds when they ask him, how can you do this when you're that you're killing innocent people, you're killing women and children, you're not killing combatants, and the whole idea that like, this is even like a fair fight to begin with is like extremely dubious, because obviously like this is just like a forward, assault aggression by the U.S. against a country. This is not like a civil war or anything. But beyond the point, like they ask him, like, how do you rationalize, how do you make sense of this? And he says, well, you know, the Vietnamese have a different conception of life than us. They believe in reincarnation. So when we murder them, when we murder their children, we murder their families, it's okay. Effectively, he didn't say this exactly, but implied is that it's okay because they understand life as far as, you know, they in reincarnation terms, that they're going to have a life after this. They'll all meet up. It's fine. It's cool. Doesn't matter that we're destroying them, their lives, this country. Like that's the danger when you really fundamentally think that differences in humans, like across the world, across cultures, goes all the way down to the fundamentals of what it means to be a human being. That's typically what you're going to get.
Masha Gessen just made that argument about Russians and why they're not getting the vaccine. So they just, you know, the Russian people, the Russian mind doesn't value life the way we do.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Before we move on, because I saw that you put out a comment by Saylo Lewis, who's a very good commenter. She always has really good things to say. I assume it's a she. I don't know. Whatever. Saylo Lewis has good things to say, and I see their comments on Jacobin as well. But because she said earlier, our class analysis can afford to be more nuanced than determining someone's class standing as permanent. And she says that in this late stage capitalism, no one's economic standing is permanent. I think I agree with half of what you're saying. And this is relevant to what we're talking about, because, you know, our alternative to this kind of like identity politics, like bourgeois nationalist politics, basically, is to say, no, the left has to be about class politics. And it's because class is not something learned. It's not subjective. It can be felt subjectively, and you can learn about your class position, but your class position doesn't emerge because you learn it. It's there because it fundamentally is the distinction between what you have economically, resourcefully, and what you have to do to make your living. And so, yeah, it can change, of course. You can change how much you have, and you can change what you have to do to make a living. But for the vast majority of working people, it doesn't, in fact, change. And that's kind of the whole lie about, you know, the American dream, that you can just, if you work hard enough, you can become a small business owner and then exploit other people. It's that the vast majority of people are stuck, dependent on the market, dependent on employers, having to sell their ability to work in order to make their living. And understanding that fact is not as just an objective reality in capitalism is where we start, and we say that's what determines not all of, but the vast majority of people's economic material interests, if like what they want, what they need in life. And then we say, here's a political program to meet those needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, yeah, sure, people's class positions shift. I'd also say, as you say, people's class positions aren't a function of the thoughts in their head or how they feel about them. That, like, this is a pretty obvious difference, I think, between identity categories and class as an objective economic position. That if somebody has if somebody has a gender identity that differs from their sex at birth, and you're not an asshole, you respect it.
No. You guys are wrong. If you wear a trucker hat, you're working class. If you listen to Toby,
exactly right. If somebody says, like,
remember that debate? That debate was like raging like 6 months ago. I vaguely remember that, something like that, where it's like if you get McDonald's breakfast every Tuesday, you're working class.
Right. Yeah, it's all consumer preference shit. Yeah, like
exactly.
What kind of car you drive,
or conversely, if somebody's like, oh, I don't need to be in a union because I'm not a worker. I'm a professional, right? Like, you don't respect that. Right. You say you're delusional. You are a worker, and you do need to be organized. And I think that this, the same thing. I'm going to go back to the conversation with Glenn. I mean, it's what he's raising, at least in that devil's advocate way, about like, the left, making progress in the culture war. I mean, again, what's the left? And this is, I remember there's at the conference in Idaho where I first met Michael Brooks, actually, which is funny to think about, because like one of the first conversations we ever had was about how much we both admired Glenn Greenwald, for NSA and Brazil stuff. But at that conference, people were very mad at Doug Lane because of a video that he'd done about intersectionality for Zero Books. and there was like this kind of debate thing at the end of the conference. There was like a very weird thing that was set up to argue about that video. And I remember Michael telling Doug, it's like, look, here's the one thing you should tell them. Like, do you think Goldman Sachs gives a shit if you're trans, right? I mean, like they don't, right? I mean, they make just as much money either way, right? I mean, whether it's like the old boys club version of Goldman Sachs, or it's the version of Goldman Sachs where, everybody, they make sure that people in certain positions have certain identity categories or whatever. It's completely like, hey, I would prefer like inclusive capitalism to like, openly white supremacist capitalism or whatever. But like also like as far as the fundamental thing that the left is objecting to about capitalism goes, it's completely indifferent. I mean, like it can, like what the identity characteristics are, or whether everybody has to go to Robin DiAngelo trainings, or whether what terminology you're supposed to use in the internal memos. I mean, the profit making death machine continues worrying on just as efficiently one way or the other.
Yeah. Can I make one small comment?
Yeah.
This is like a very small thing, because like at the beginning of the interview, when Glenn goes like, Ben, you're in the Bernie, like DSA, and then he like quickly apologizes. Like, I don't mean to like put you in a box, and you're like, no worries about the box.
You're like,
I'm
box me,
box,
daddy.
dude. Box me, baby. I think that there's like there's something that I think about a lot in that there is it's something that's very American as well, is this kind of fear of being part of a team or an ideology, or that you have to be like your own thinker, and you have to be like everything, like that's a value that is like incredibly important. And there's certain people who very much kind of that's a huge part of their self-conception, that they're you can't put me in a box. Like I just simply look at the situation and then I come to my own conclusions, and I get the impulse, and that is kind of in many ways an admirable impulse. But like at the same time, there is something to be said about discipline, and about especially when you're engaged in politics, and you need like certain group, you need to win over groups, and you need to expand the group. Like if everyone is just a free thinker, then it's just a bunch of people yelling in a fucking thing, instead of like building a coherent block that can exercise power, and as well as like it creates a situation where you need to rethink everything anew, instead of learning from the past and other people on your team, that can inform the way you look at the world today. That there's a certain kind of desire to just like reject all that and embrace heterodoxy. And I just find heterodoxy to be like very overrated. In general.
No, absolutely. By the way, I like back up what you're saying. Antonio, also a consistently good commentator, says, don't rely on accumulated knowledge. That's being a sheep.
It's actually racist. Accumulated knowledge is just white supremacy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's actually in the book, the book we're talking about, Canceling Comedians. I quote Christopher Hitchens back in 1986 when he had much better politics than the version of Christopher Hitchens who's all over YouTube. And he has this essay called Blunt Instruments, and he's got this great line in it. I quote there, says, I have never been able, except in my laser moments, to employ the word predictable as a term of abuse. Nor has the expression knee-jerk ever struck me as a witty way of denigrating a set of strongly held convictions. Speaking purely for myself, I would be alarmed if my knee failed to respond to certain stimuli. It would warn me of a loss of nerve. I've written in the past year about the MX missile, constructive engagement, the confirmation of Edwin Meese, and other episodes. Naturally, I hope that my arguments were original, but I would be depressed to think that anybody who knew me or my stuff could not easily have predicted the line I would take. Yeah. In the charmed journal of circle of neoliberal and neoconservative journalism, however, unpredictability is the special emblem and certificate of self-congratulation. To be able to bray that, quote, as a liberal, I say bomb the shit out of them, unquote, is to have achieved that eye-catching, versatile marketability that is so beloved of editors and talk show hosts. as a lifelong socialist, I say let's bomb the shit out of them. See what I mean? It lacks the sex appeal somehow. Predictable as hell.
Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, I would hope I could predict the Ben Burgis line on next week's big news event. I mean, or the Cale Brooks line on it. I would hope I would be able to. I mean, obviously, like this isn't true of like 100% of things, but like, the 98% of things, like I should be able to predict the Cale Brooks line.
No, absolutely. I mean, you should be able to know like what I think when Donald Rumsfeld died. Which, by the way, I saw while we were talking. Jacobin put up my obituary. This is the headline.
Hell yeah.
I don't know. I'm worried that it's too subtle.
Not very atheist of you, Ben. That's like part of your whole appeal, dude.
Yeah, I wish we had some. I wish I had
like
something
Donald Rumsfeld rot in like the ground as you turn into just atoms in the universe again.
Donald Rumsfeld get eaten by maggots.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish I had something to pour out right now.
Pour one out for Donnie.
Yeah. One last thought on this, and then we should probably jump back to the interview. I mean, I agree so much with what's been said. I mean, it's just because like politics it's for the most part pretty simple. Like the problem is when it gets complex, when it gets into like all of this, like all the dumb shit that's happening with like different personalities between politicians or media figures, or when it's a lot of he said, she said, or there's like, of course, strategy matters a great deal. Tactics matter, but like the fundamentals of like whose side are you on and what's at stake in the fight is typically pretty simple. Most people get it. And like what we lack in the US is not like, it's not that people don't get that. It's that they don't have the means to fight back. They don't have the institutions. They don't have the parties. They don't have working class associations and like fighting strong militant trade unions. Like that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean,
in the words of Fred Durst, it's all about that he said, she said bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Cale, you're laughing at it, but there's no way you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about. Fuck you.
No, you don't. You're a liar.
Yeah. I don't know. You want to tell Cale who Fred Durst is, or where do you want to start here?
He's a legend. He was a legend of a certain time and place when you were 5 years old.
It's all about the nookie. Let's continue with
wrong song. Yeah. See, you don't know.
I should say, by the way, that I flippantly said that lots of groups help invent math. None of them people in Western Europe.
Oh, come on.
People started bringing up, like, yeah, what about calculus? Was it that like, it's like
we're talking about like the fucking the basic principles, like the base of which all that shit was then,
exactly. Like
nuance, too much nuance. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Look, it's not that we're trying to take calculus from the whiteys, it's that like, this is building on a conceptual framework that, I mean, some of it Greeks maybe, but tons of it in the Arab world, tons of it in India, etc. But anyway.
Yeah, Ben deplatforming Isaac Newton right now. It's pretty problematic.
Yeah, or Leibniz, they can't even agree, right?
Wait, did the apple really fall in his head? That's how he figured it out?
Probably.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
They're both stealing it from.
Okay.
All right. Let's go.
That I want to ask next is the perfect segue, which is the assumption of what you said, and I think of your book, is that the people to whom you're addressing this critique share that desire. In other words, they don't want to just be this kind of aggrieved minority with like a few, squad type members of Congress who voice their grievances and they get to cheer for them and then feel angry most of the time because none of it actually changes anything legislatively or substantively or whatever. What you want is for there to be actual change, right? Like you want to see the erosion of corporatism and the end to militarism and imperialism, and not just posturing angrily that it's not being done because you see politics as a way of actually making a difference in the world. And your argument is that these are the people who share those same goals as you, and they're just not using the right tactics to get there. And I really question that. assumption. And the reason I do, I want to use your Jordan Peterson example because I find it super interesting. So here you have in Jordan Peterson somebody who I can understand for sure why he's anathema to the left, but he's not. He's more kind of like a cultural commentator and like self-help guru than he is, I would say, like a hardcore political dogmatist.
Right.
And he has kind of been preaching this ethos of self-sufficiency, particularly to young men who in modern Western society are really struggling, right? They can't get married for a lot of different reasons. They're not financially capable of starting a family. They feel lost. They feel without purpose. And he's giving them a kind of sense of spirituality and connectedness and purpose. And here he is, this like icon of self-sufficiency, who himself encounters this incredibly grave and debilitating and like potentially life-threatening problem, which is that he became addicted, presumably to like illegal narcotics. I mean, maybe, you know, he was probably prescribed them in the beginning. Right. And I don't know whether he always had a prescription or not. It doesn't really matter. I mean, he was obviously had a very serious addiction. I don't think we know exactly to what. I know there was some painkillers involved, but I think it was like benzodiazepine, which, you know, like Xanax and that Valium, that kind of class of drugs, which millions and millions and millions of Americans are suffering from, in particular in the working class communities that have been gutted by Clintonian free trade and globalism and neoliberalism, exactly the thing that the left exists to oppose. And so here you have this kind of avatar of like, I don't know, call him if you want, right-wing culturalism, who's suffering this problem that all the people that you want to reach are most are encountering either in their own lives or people that they love. And instead of using that as a moment to reaching out to these people who right now are listening to the word socialism and running away from it, or even if they are like the policies, instead of expressing empathy and looking for ways to build bridges based on this common struggle that so many people have with addiction of all kinds, it's, as you said, this kind of like opposite instinct, which is to say we have no interest in reaching out to any people who aren't already on board with us, even to the extent that we're going to get angry at you if you just do this apolitical gesture of human decency by wishing that person well. And that really does lead me, Ben, to this question I've had for a long time that I think your book prompts a lot, which is there a segment of the left that prefers persecution and being aggrieved to actually winning in the way that you defined it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that on some level there is. I mean, I'm sure not conscious, but I think that it is a more, if that's what you're used to, if your entire life, politically has been spent in this oppositional posture, then it becomes very comfortable, becomes very familiar. I think emotionally, a lot of your self-identification and being built around your oppositional stance with regard to all these very real injustices. Whereas the second you start to win anything or achieve any sort of power, and or actually start to achieve any of your goals, there are going to be all kinds of messy compromises, and you have to do some very imperfect things. You're not always allying with people that you're crazy about. You have to think about trade-offs that you might prefer not to think about. I mean, if you look at like any left movement that has actually achieved like parliamentary power anywhere in the world, you'll see this. Even if you look at like insurrectionary movements that have achieved power, like Bolsheviks or whatever, you'll still see a version of all of these problems. And it does seem to me that there is a segment of the left or there is maybe, I think there's a range. I think some people have attitudes like this to different extents, and there are people who do to some extent, but maybe salvageable. I hope so. But I think that there are some people who are more comfortable with that kind of emotional self-definition, to the extent that they're so allergic to dealing with all of that, that even in a case where absolutely no real trade-off that mattered is actually present, they still don't like it, right? I mean, like, I think the Joe Rogan Bernie example we were talking about at the beginning is perfect for that, because, I mean, I would understand, maybe what the reaction would have been if there had been some sort of process of negotiation, between Joe Rogan and Bernie Sanders, where it said, oh, here you have to give up this, your position on this or that issue, in order to secure this endorsement. You have to say no, and now trans people will not, be allowed to fund transition costs for Medicare.
Bernie didn't even ask. He didn't even ask. Joe Rogan just blurted it out.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no compromise in anything substantive. Literally, the only issue is being supported by somebody who doesn't have great views necessarily on every single topic, although I think that's often very exaggerated, but it's not. But I think that Rogan is somebody who's like most people, in the sense that people like me or you or other people who do political media, who spend all day, every day, right? They spend all this time thinking about politics, and they spend so much time thinking about it that they have like a well-defined, coherent worldview. That makes you a little bit weird. Most people are not like that. Most people might have, that's not that they don't pay any attention to politics. They might have political instincts, some political reactions to events that happen, but it's not in the top 10 things that are going on in their lives. And so they don't, like, those political instincts and reactions don't really gel into an internally consistent worldview. And I think somebody like Rogan is much more like that. I mean, he cares at least as much about mixed martial arts and psychedelics and half a dozen other subjects as he does about politics. He spent a lot of time talking about politics.
Well, and not only that, I think it's so important. Like, he can say in one breath, like, my first choice is Bernie, my second choice is Tulsi Gabbard, and then if they don't win, I'll vote for Trump.
Right.
And to the average person who spends, several hours a day, engaged with and locked into elite political discourse, that makes no sense.
Right.
But
How could that be?
I would venture to say to most people, it makes a lot of sense. And the evidence for that is overwhelming. The fact that there are millions, not tens of thousands or even millions of people who twice voted for Barack Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. Here in Brazil, where I live, and you and I have talked about Brazilian politics before, some, especially in connection with my book, obviously, Jair Bolsonaro, this far-right candidate,
voted for Joe Bolsonaro,
who voted for Lula twice, and then Dilma twice, and then voted for Bolsonaro. And if you're a political professional, that makes no sense. But if you're an average citizen, it makes a lot of sense. And even, it was common, especially in 2016, to hear people saying the two candidates I like are Bernie and Trump.
Yeah.
And so I just, to me, the problems you identify in your book are very much about this kind of cleavage between elite discourse on the one hand and the way that ordinary people reason and think and form value judgments on the other.
Yeah,
I think I think the classic example now is like the word Latinx, right? Which is almost like obligatory in certain elite cultural circles. If you don't say it, you're a bad person.
Like 0.001% of Latinx people actually want to be called Latinx.
Yeah, or
you're looking at two of them right now.
Excuse me, it's pronounced Latinx.
Like they almost all hate it.
Right.
Like that's just like the most extreme example, but I think you see that over and over.
So it's a telling example for sure.
And what explains that cleavage, and how can people on your side of the political scale start to think about and fix that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what helps to explain people who might say, yeah, I voted for Lula twice, voted for Dilma twice, and then voted for Bolsonaro, or certainly in the case that I'm more intimately familiar with, people who maybe even, people who would have voted for Bernie if he had been the Democratic nominee, but who voted for Trump, which there's a lot of statistical evidence that was a common thing, certainly common enough that it would have changed the outcome of the 2016 election. I mean, the slightest wind could have been different, Trump would have lost in Michigan and Wisconsin. Certainly, I think Bernie Sanders being the nominee would have done that. And I think that what explains that, at least part of what explains that, is that most people are not super invested in necessarily the details of what policies are on a candidate's website and various things. There might be some that they're aware of, they care about, but oftentimes the calculation is being made on a much more visceral level. Do you think, does this person seem to care about, seem to be responsive to the things that affect my life? Does this person, or even if they aren't, if I really, really hate the mainstream establishment because they seem to have made my life terrible, or at least criminally indifferent to it, does this person seem to be opposed to and to be hated by that same establishment? If so, how bad can they be? That they're all, and also again, I think that oftentimes, even on an issue level, I think that many people, have reactions to different events, different policies that can be a little all over the map from the perspective of a political professional who's thinking about this all the time, because they haven't thought about enough for it to gel together into a coherent worldview, and that's okay. I mean, I don't think that's a criticism. I think that most people who are who have to pay pay bills, who have who are faced with all kinds of things in their lives that are more urgent to them than this, and who also just want to spend time with people they care about, are understandably not obsessed with this stuff in the same way that like a media professional tweets all day and all night about it is. But I think that the most effective strategy when it comes to to people who have combinations of views like we're describing, it might sometimes seem odd or frustrating, or how could they possibly have this view and that view that doesn't make any sense. The least effective thing that you could do is to denounce them over the things that you disagree with them, and say that until they fix those, you're never going to have anything to do with them. The more effective thing that you could do is to focus in on the most appealing parts of your program, the things that even if somebody might have. Even if maybe somebody has views that aren't great about trans people, for example, they might still really want healthcare. They might still really, really hate Blue Cross Blue Shield based on their the constant frustrations of dealing with them. They might not want the United States to fight wars abroad because they might know from their experience, people they care about, who've had to go off and fight in those wars, what it's done to them. Etc. And you can appeal to them on the basis of those things. And I would actually argue that the lesson of a lot of relevant history is that the best way, if you look at the history of the labor movement, for example, the best way to get people to have better attitudes, even to the extent that that's the goal, right? Which I think we should question. I think that my primary concern in politics is changing the material world, not changing the thoughts of people's heads. But even to the extent that you are concerned about the thoughts of people's heads because they have destructive prejudices, I would argue, if you look at the history of the labor movement, that it's a much better strategy to try to collaborate with people around shared interests and to build movements based on solidarity for those shared interests, and hope that in the course of working together with other kinds of people to achieve that, maybe that their attitudes will improve. That's certainly a better strategy than just saying like, oh, you have problematic views X, Y, and Z. To hell with you. I want nothing to do with you.
DJ, run that shit back. Like that's it. That's it. Like I love Ben. You did a great job answering that because like that's the core of it. Like that's again, Saylo, who we shouted out earlier in the comments a moment earlier, was saying like you're going to end up having to organize with people you disagree with that you find frustrating. It's like, yeah, that's like if you actually have political ambitions, you actually want to change the social reality that people live within, and ultimately change, you know how they're, whether it's a matter of income, resources. If you actually want to change people's living standards, you're not going to be doing it with your friends. Right. You're going to be doing it with coworkers. You're going to be doing it with strangers. You're going to be doing it with people on campaigns. You're going to have to convince a lot of people who don't already agree with you. Because, like, if everyone already agreed, then what do we have to do? What's the point of politics? Like, if we're all already on the same team, like, you have to necessarily go out there and talk to people who are either like apathetic and not political, or who disagree with you. And it's important, the class analysis is important to know like which people are going to be, you know, amenable to your ideas. Some people, you know, you're not going to go to like a, you know, some business owners are just never going to agree with you on your politics, right, because they necessarily have different interests because they have to compete as a capitalist or something in a market. But like, there's a lot of people who are in fact amenable and that disagree with you. And you have to reach out to them. And to Ben's point, like, if your problem is that they have like some really horrible bigoted idea in their head, which sure, a lot of people do.
Who cares?
Yeah. Well,
like, first, honestly, who the fuck cares?
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it's both, right? That it's like, okay, first, yeah, I mean, like if you know them and, you know, have to interact with them in your life, you know, you might have a reason to care, you know, if it, right, you know, whatever. But like, but certainly like the overriding goal, right? Like the thing that organizes how we think about politics should not really be about the thoughts and feelings in people's heads. It should be about the, you know, like changing economic structures, about, you know, about at least at the very least changing the distribution of wealth, and, you know, all like those are the things that like, or, you know, even with, you know, civil rights, I mean, like changing actual laws, right? Like all of these things matter on a different level than changing the bad ideas in people's heads. Now, there might be reasons why you think, yeah, to the extent that we can do anything about the ideas in people's heads, you know, that we want to do that too. But like even there, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure I would actually be shocked if I'd never like brought this up to either one of you ever, since it's an example I probably use way too much. But have either of you seen the James Earl Jones movie from what is it, like the 80s or 90s, Madawan?
Yeah, rules.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it.
Oh, Nando, you're a little too young.
I know it. I know what it is, but I haven't seen it. I've tried to see it.
Sure.
There was like, it wasn't on Criterion for a while. Now it's on.
You don't get it.
Listen, young Cale. You know, you better watch your mouth, all right? And respect your elders.
Yeah, that's good. I just last night with patrons, I just watched the Best of Enemies, the documentary about Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley, and so that's like a key moment in there when Vidal calls Buckley a crypto Nazi, and Buckley says, "Listen, queer, if you call me a Nazi one more time, I'm going to sock you in the mouth."
I'm going to sock you in the goddamn mouth.
That's exactly. So we could get some moments like that here, but
that documentary is pretty fun. I like that documentary.
Yeah, on the before we go live, there's Nando and I usually have a similar rapport.
yeah. But I think so. Yeah, Madawan, for anybody who's watching who wasn't familiar with it, it's a movie about the coal wars in West Virginia in the 1920s, when there were these like really massive like strikes by coal miners that like really turned into like almost like a low-key civil war going on in West Virginia. And part of what the movie portrays is I think in a very historically accurate way is that like there's a group of black workers who are brought in as scabs, but then they're willing to walk out and join the union. But then like there are people in the union who need to be convinced to go along with that. It's like, oh, you know, do we really have to let these black people in. There are even black people who aren't crazy about like working with like Italian people who are like involved in the strike because like it's the 20s, so people have all kinds of weird prejudices like that. But the lots and lots of people in this struggle had very, very problematic attitudes, right? There's lots of things, attitudes that people had who are coal miners in West Virginia that are not very progressive in the 20s. But one of the things that historically does the best job of like ameliorating those or reducing those attitudes, is
not having this conversation.
Yeah. yeah. He decided this was too much. One of the things that historically does the best job of reducing these attitudes is having people be engaged in common struggle. That they're working together with people they might not like, and it humanizes them. And if you thought, well, you had to like them in order to engage in common struggle, then this would be an unsolvable problem because you can't like fix, you can't reduce the bad attitudes unless you've worked together, and you're not going to work together if you don't like them. But happily, there is a solution to this problem, which is that even if you don't like somebody, you can still recognize that you have shared material interests and you can organize together on the basis of that.
Yeah. I liked what Glenn, what Glenn was saying about the media's bafflement as to voters' preferences, because that's something that I've noticed a lot, and I think about the media a lot. And I think that one of the great polarizations in America, like we talk about America as being polarized between these two sides. Often the conversation around polarization is incorrectly saying that both sides are moving away from each other, when both sides are moving in the same direction, just in coherent kind of blocks, and the blocks are just getting more coherent. But the thing is that that polarization is occurring amongst a certain class of people, and they're largely speaking people who are hardcore media consumers. There's a stat that Glenn trots out a lot, which is 100% true, which is that like something like 95% of New York Times readers identify as Democrats. Like that's the kind of polarization that is existing. But underneath those class of people, New York Times readers, there's the majority of people who are not engaged with the media as such, and the media as it's structured in this country, which is the class composition of the media is what it is. It's largely gone from being a pretty working class job, like a crusty newspaperman from the 1940s or whatever. Now they're all like Harvard grads and shit. From the people that are not engaged in that kind of polarization, which has been, I don't know which came first, the media or the polarization, but whatever it is, they reinforce each other. If you're not engaged in that, you see politics in a completely different way. That's baffling to most people in that class. But for us, it should present opportunities. And the challenge is breaking through in that. But the fact is that even us, like on the sort of alternative media, radical left media, or whatever you want to call it, they kind of lump us in with all that shit as well. So we're for better or worse fighting in or swimming in that stream. And for us, the challenge is getting out of it and reaching those people. But being baffled at their political preferences is like the worst way to get there.
Right. I think for like most people in America, and I would say most people, let's just say like in the developed world, like the number one way in which they relate to politics is that they don't relate to politics. Like they don't have connections to politics. They don't watch it. They don't follow it. They're not at all like invested in what's going on. Maybe they turn out to vote in the general election, maybe. But like in the US, it's, this last election's a little bit different, but for, the trend line over the last, basically like over the last like 50, 60 years has been that it's about half of the population that can vote does vote. Most people don't tune in, and the way that they actually experience real politics, insofar as politics is a real thing, it's not in like the horse race, it's not in DC, it's whatever, it's not, you know, New York Times, whatever. It's like, you know, how am I relating to my boss right now? Like, is he just completely crushing me, or is he somewhat crushing me? Like, it's like, that's where, you know, it's just necessary strategically for the left. If the left wants to be relevant, like, our base is going to be working people, and we have to deal with working class workshop or like workplace issues, like the issues that happen on the workplace floor. So that's, you know, just, it's important to keep that in mind, I think. Like, and that, I think, helps explain why people like will end up voting fairly idiosyncratically, because like they don't have time to think about these things. They're not very interested because they don't see it being relevant to them. They're interested in, like, do I have enough income right now to make ends meet? And a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with the term Middle American radicals, or Mars, so-called Mars voters?
No.
It's like it was like a political science study from whatever the fuck. I don't even remember the guy who did it, but it was like, I read it and it rang incredibly true to me that a huge chunk of the voting population, especially so-called independents, are these so-called Middle American radicals, or Mars voters. And what independents are is not, you know, I just want a little bit of cuts to Social Security, and a little bit of you know, this on the other side, and a little bit of, I'll sprinkle a little Democrat, and I'll sprinkle a little Republican, and that's what I like. No, they have incredibly radical views on almost every issue. They just don't fit into the coherent ideologies or issue lists of the two parties. So it'll be like, I want to tax millionaires at like 99% and like shoot every immigrant in the head. Like that's like a, you know, an exaggerated version of what I'm talking about. And that's what a lot of people are, and that's what like Joe Rogan is kind of in.
Not the specifics, but
in
fact, Rogan is actually some of his commentary on immigration has been really good. But he,
I didn't mean it like in that.
No,
sense.
But yeah, no, I get what you're saying, right? That like that the people who are identified as like, oh, they're independent voters, so that gets coded in media coverage as centrist. They're actually like not at all centrist. If they might have like what would be considered in media to be super extreme views, but they're just like mixed together in weird ways or whatever, which is many people. Again, like, it's a really simple point, but I think it's something that people who are just, you know, this small segment of the population that's soaked in political media, you know, that just like, you know, soaks in it all day, which, you know, I don't want to insult those people because, one, I'm one of them, and two, they're the audience for the show. But like the small percentage of the population that answers to that description, if you're in it, it's really easy to start forgetting that most people are not in it. And most people have, you know, like Cale is saying, like they don't, like, it's not that they don't have political reactions to things or political impulses. It's that they don't like spend so much time thinking about it that those reactions and impulses cohere together into an internally consistent worldview. You're a little bit weird if you have thought about it enough for that to be true. And that's the sense in which Rogan actually is kind of an everyman, because even though he hosts a podcast and, you know, he, you know, spends a fair amount of time talking about politics, it's not like it's not even probably one of his top 5 favorite subjects to talk about on there. And I don't think he has spent enough time thinking about it for it to cohere together into a worldview. So he can have like Jordan Peterson on, and he'll mostly nod along with it, except for the cider thing, you know, and you know, but like he doesn't necessarily, you know, a lot of what Peterson's saying will sound right to him or whatever. But like, you can also have Cornel West on, and he'll have the same, you know, the same reaction, you know, like that. And again, sometimes people have like, you know, the part that we're about to watch is the part where we actually disagree the most, you know, because it's about like the extent to which, you know, right-wing populism is a real thing, you know, but which my hot take is that it's not a real thing at the level of anybody who has any kind of power. But sure, I mean, if we're just describing what like all the weird idiosyncratic things that different groups of voters think, yeah, sure, it's a real thing, right? Like it's a, you know, that's a different issue.
I produced a documentary in 2016 called Trumpland, which was nominated for an Emmy. We profiled a group of Trump voters. It was very simple documentary. This was before Trump really became. We started producing it before it was clear that he was going to win the Republican nomination. One of the voters we profiled was a guy in Nogales, Arizona, who was Mexican guy who came to this country as an undocumented immigrant. And he was a Trump supporter. And like we talked to him why, and he had incredibly incoherent views, but he was very passionate and very, in his own way, well spoken. And he talks about how, in 2000, he dropped out of high school, and then started landscaping and built up a little landscaping business that was actually decently successful. And when the 2008 housing crisis and financial crisis happened, he lost his business because there was no one building houses. Like it was just like everything just collapsed under feet of him, and he got to the point where he fell behind on some car payments, and the government started garnishing part of his wages, which he was now working at a bread factory, making like $11 an hour or something. And you heard him talk, and he had these unbelievably like incoherent, mixed view. Like he fucking hated Border Patrol. Like he thought the Border Patrol people were like basically Nazis, but he was supporting Trump. The guy who the media was like saying all the time was like the anti-immigrant guy. I mean, not incorrectly in any way, but he was on board the Trump train. And it's just like, it was just like, that's the type of guy that exists in America, and exists everywhere, really. It's just like trying to square that peg. You're going to drive yourself crazy. You have to figure out a way to work within that kind of incoherence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, I mean, like, and that just is a thing. Like some people, I think, on the left don't want to admit it, since we. I mean, I think it makes people uncomfortable for various reasons, some of which I'm sympathetic to. But like, yeah, there are going to be people going to have weird incoherent combinations of views. There are people who are going to react to like, a vague sense of dissatisfaction and the kind of vibe they get from different candidates or whatever. And yeah, you just are going to get Bernie Trump swing voters and Lula Bolsonaro swing voters and Mélenchon Le Pen swing voters.
Socialist Party in Spain to Vox, which is the far right party. It happens all the time in Spain.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and so it's like the good news is that like, I mean, really, if anything, what we should be happy about is that we do have a way to appeal to people who might otherwise end up like voting for these horrific options. That like oftentimes, yeah, people have weird incoherent combinations of views and very vague views and whatever. But, for those people who can be gotten, like oftentimes somewhere in their, weird combination of views is I would like it if I had healthcare. I would like it if I was paid more money, and there is a lot to work with there.
Well, that's which like everyone wants.
Well, right. I mean, it's like the numbers for like support of Medicare for all in the abstract, the fact that like people are saying, it's sometimes like 70+% of the population says they want Medicare for all. And that's despite the fact that like there's no test run. No one's tried Medicare for all in the US. I mean, some people have obviously had Medicaid and Medicare and have different opinions of that, although typically it's fairly good. But people understand a fairly complex piece of legislation pretty well and say, yeah, I do want that. I mean, I think it just to Nando's point about the Mars voters, I mean, most of the people that don't vote would probably be in support of like social democratic politics. And of course, there's a lot of people who are fairly reactionary on immigration, and I think the left has to have a stronger answer on the question of nation states and borders and immigrants. And these are really economic questions. They're not culture war issues, and the right loves to make it into a culture war. But the other thing is that like the U.S. among developed countries has some of the like the most progressive views on immigrants. Like we're actually way better off than like
people don't know about that shit. People don't know about that shit. Go to Europe, man. They fucking hate immigrants. They fucking hate them. They fucking hate them.
Which side note, by the way, there is like a weird parochial thing in the United States where people who correctly say that lots of racism exists in the United States and who aren't intimately familiar with any other society, like just jump to this must be like the most racist society ever.
It's a form of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, guys, you got to get out more. I don't know that we're even in the top 10.
I don't know. Have you heard about homophobia in Jamaica? Problematic as fuck.
Right, exactly.
We actually benefited massively from the fact that we had a civil rights movement in this country. Like so much of like our decent like progressive values as human beings in this country comes down to like the efforts of that mass movement, which again, to go back to what I said earlier, was not like a bunch of elites. It wasn't like the black middle class pursuing that. Like it only came to fruition because you had a mass movement of ordinary people getting involved in that, because you had the labor movement involved. So
yeah, which and by the way, every time the subject comes up, I think it is worth saying that there's a lot of like weird lack of historical memory on this. I remember last year, I think at the end of last year around there, this weirdo Noah Berlatsky wrote this.
Yeah. Friend of the pod, friend of the show.
He's like, right. So he's somebody who
he's your best friend. He's your literal best friend.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm also too young for this reference. So.
Okay, Noah Berlatsky is a journalist. Is that the word we're going to use?
I'm not convinced he's a real person, and he's not just like. I don't even know what he looks like. I just know.
So the Noah Berlatsky character in that might or might not be linked to an actual human being is somebody who. Right. He does have a lot of like surprisingly mainstream writing credits, but that's mostly for his cultural commentary, which is all like Marvel movies or the height of cinema. But he also spends a lot of time like denouncing people like leftists.
Red Brown Alliance, dude, the fascists in the left.
Yes, denouncing people who is detected as being a part of a Red Brown Alliance. And so he wrote an article.
Totally real thing. That's not like it's more likely that an Infinity Stone or whatever the fuck Marvel movies thing like falls out of the sky and like blows the world up than like a fucking Red Brown Alliance in the United States in 2021.
No, exactly. That like that like the DSA and Richard Spencer get together or whatever. Yeah, exactly. But but as part of this, I remember like one of his things was there's like, Ben says that like you can have a more effective basis for organizing around police violence and other issues if you do it on the basis of class solidarity across identity categories. But this just isn't true. We can see from history that so many of the most effective movements have organized people along racial lines, and none of his examples were actually examples of that. So there's the he brought up like the movement to end slavery, which for God's sake, like read Matt Karp, literally the early Republicans used this like proto Occupy Wall Street rhetoric about how the slave power represented not 1/100th of the population, but certainly the civil rights movement. I mean it's just weird that like somehow so many people have managed to collectively forget that the classical civil rights movement in the early 60s was all about universalist rhetoric and was all about tying the end of racial discrimination to broad-based economic demands that would benefit the entire population.
That fucking, you know, like the Martin Luther King, you know, like basic messages that are often obscured by the right, obviously, but oh, thank you, Cale. I mean, well, okay, one caveat I'll say about
as
the resident European here, you know, this is my identity politics. Okay, you disgusting people from across the pond are not allowed to talk about Europe. But I mean, the caveat I'll say, like in Europe, you're allowed to do much more de jure racism than in the United States. That's just a fact. I'm sorry. Like it is inconceivable for a black man to become the president of France, even though there are plenty of black people in France.
I remember that. By the way, that pissing me off in 2008, like right after the election, there was a British person that I knew who was hanging, you know, was a friend, and they were hanging out with a group of friends, and asked what he thought about the election that just happened where Obama won. And he said something like, oh, you know, congratulations on rejoining the civilized world. And I remember thinking, it's like, motherfucker.
You would never elect a black president. Fuck you. You know, like
oh yeah, give me a list of all of the black prime ministers of the United Kingdom. I mean, yeah.
But, you know, because Europe has a more robust welfare state than the United States, like the experience of being a poor minority in, say, Spain or France is not as violent and because the cops are not as violent and a million other things. Like the experience of being the average kind of poor person, which still sucks to be poor, but like there are basic kind of material protections in Western Europe that exist for everyone, that is there, that do not exist in the United States, whether you're black or you're white. But it is true that like in the culture, in all that stuff, you can be, it is much more acceptable, and it's changing, to be just like overtly racist in Europe. And again, there is much more of this feeling that like we would never like, you know, like elect a fucking black president in France. Like we would just never, like that is inconceivable. Like at least in the current state of things, and it happened in the United States. Like it fucking happened. But yeah.
There's a really good. I'm trying to find it.
The question is, would you rather be a working class black person in the United States or in France? Like if you would have to pick the lottery.
Clearly France, right? I mean, like the you know, since even if some of the cultural attitudes are worse, and that might make your life worse, probably the fact that you're like much less likely to die of an easily treatable disease, and you know, and you have, you know, you're much more likely to be protected, you know, by a militant trade union, and you know, and all of that stuff is going to make your life much better. Which, by the way, like it is always weird when like every few years there'll be some poll that comes out that like breaks down to different racial demographics, like what issues people care most about, and there's always this weird cycle where liberals are weirded out by it because like the script that they think is supposed to happen is that all of the like black respondents are supposed to say that the issue they care most about is police violence or, you know, something, and all, you know, the Latinx respondents are supposed to care that all they care about is immigration, and then like everybody's always weirded out because it turns out what members of every racial group say they care most about is jobs and healthcare.
Yeah,
right. Well, I'm putting an article in the chat. People are interested, but there's this really great piece by Robert Brenner and Joanna Brenner, who are just two of like the US's best.
Are they brother and sister or married?
I actually don't know their relationship, but they're not married. Robert's married to Susie Weissman, but I actually don't know what the relationship is with Joanna. But it's this really great piece that they wrote many, you know, decades ago, of kind of like the turn to Reaganism and trying to explain like why is the working class voting for Reagan in America after you just had this, after the civil rights movement like 15 years earlier, basically. And it's, you know, and this is I'm bringing this up insofar as like we're trying to understand like why is it that the working class in Europe, for instance, can be xenophobic, and despite the fact that they have had social democracy and still have a good chunk of the welfare state in existence, and it's raining in the other room, I guess. But the thing is that like
that's what the libs say, you know.
Yeah.
What?
The libs say that, like that. Oh,
Right,
look,
right.
Europe has this welfare state. Look how fucking racist they are.
Right. This is one of the big knockdowns against social democracy. Is this like how is it that like they're both racist and they have a welfare state? Well, it must be that welfare state is built on racism, which is just so not true. But if you spend like 5 minutes looking at any history of any of this, like it's just not the case. But the reason why you get xenophobic reactions in Europe, despite having this, is again, I think the same reason the two Brenners bring up in how you get the turn to Reaganism in the U.S., which is that when you are squeezing people, like you give people certain benefits in society. You say you're going to get certain things because you deserve certain things as a human being or as a citizen. You're going to have greater resources, greater political rights, and then you squeeze them of those rights, and you say, well, only some people get them now. Like working people are already at a disadvantage in terms of like their relative power to capitalists, to capital, to corporations. And so the most you can do is you say, well, I'm just going to hold on to what I have. I'm going to like take, I'm going to, it's risk averse. It's being defensive. It's saying I'm going to look out for me and my own, and it ends up becoming very amenable to things like nationalism, things like xenophobia, to right wing ideas. To say, actually, yeah, you only have so much, and you better hold on to it because there's someone else bad coming around the corner that's going to take even more from you. When of course it's them that is the one taking these things in the first place. It's capital that is like ripping apart in the U.S. and in Europe, ripping apart the welfare state. What welfare state we had in the U.S., which was limited, but that's the explanation. It's not because of the welfare state. It's completely despite it. It's the ruling class trying to rip it apart and then trying to then explain to working people, and not just explain, but like pit them into situations where as they're getting this shit taken from them, they have to understand why am I getting this taken away from me and what can I do about it? Well, you can't do much. You can just like kind of, protect yourself and those you care about, those and it doesn't lead to fostering solidarity. Obviously, it's the exact opposite. And so it's so clearly, I think, the result of ruling class offensives against working people that you end up getting these really awful, whether it be social or xenophobic ideas. So I don't know. And then if I'm wrong, give me a better argument, like that it doesn't rely on just being.
Give them an argument. Cale.
Oh shit!
Name of the fucking show. That's how you do. That's how you do your intervention on the show, Cale. You use the name of the show. I have taught you well. You use the name of the show to make your point. That's just beautiful. Yeah, I love it.
I was on the Dave Smith's podcast, the part of the problem, to talk about the book just right as it was coming out. And in an entirely unintentional way, but I saw people pointing out in the comments, just because it's a phrase that I happen to use a lot. Like I think I used the phrase "part of the problem" like 100 times over the course of that conversation, and everybody registered it's like, oh, he's doing the thing, he's saying the name of the podcast. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's clearly right. I mean, I think that reactionary politicians can tell the story about how you can only like hold on to these welfare state concessions that you've gotten by keeping out the brown people, or by whatever, Brexiting from the EU or whatever, and that's, and so sure, that can be an effective pitch, but I mean but like, let's have this solidaristic cross-racial working class movement to go beyond this and secure it that way. Can, I hope, also be an effective pitch. And yeah, if you think to maybe put what Cale said in a different way, if you don't think it could be an effective pitch, then come on, man, tell me what your plan is. Like is it basically just to scold people for having problematic attitudes until they stop being problematic, or what's the plan, right? Like, I mean, I want to know what the centrist who thinks that social democracy is bad, whatever. I want to know what their plan is for making people in these European societies less prone to xenophobic appeals because I don't really think there is one.
You make everyone watch Hamilton as a, as in every single school, every single day. You watch Hamilton, and then you cure it.
All right. Well, fair enough. I guess
You don't. Not everyone has to do the same weekends prep that you do, Nando.
All right, let's do it.
And this gets to like one of the, to me, like the nub of the book, and the reason I actually wanted to most put it before my own readership. Contrary to popular views, I've always had like a very ideologically diverse readership. This is not a new phenomenon for me. When I first began writing about civil liberties, just against George Bush and Dick Cheney, I had a lot of leftists and liberals who liked it because it was anti-Bush and Cheney and anti-war and terror. But I also had a ton of libertarians who were very much, supportive of a defense of due process and free speech and limits on executive power. And then obviously when I did the Snowden reporting, I would say probably half the support we got were from like just traditional Republicans. Maybe some of it was partisan opportunism because it was a story about Obama spying on people, just like there was partisan opportunism for Democrats defending the NSA, who wouldn't have if it had been a Republican president. But a lot of it was because, there's kind of like this joint cause where people on the left are very skeptical about and even hostile to the security state agencies that we were exposing, and people on the right are very much, there's that strain of like limited federal government and we don't want the government monitoring us and spying on us. And it was a very kind of trans-ideological cause that emerged. And even in the Congress, when there was legislation to reform the NSA, it was co-sponsored by Justin Amash. And then, like this kind of far-right libertarian Republican from Michigan and his far-left, at least for the House, Michigan colleague John Conyers. Those were the two sponsors of that NSA reform bill. And I see this all the time. I to this day, the things I write about, if I write against imperialism and militarism and questioning NATO, you can find support on the left and the right if you're purposely seeking to do that, right? Like you can, it depends on what words you choose, right? So if you are railing against centralized corporate power on Wall Street and you do it under the banner of a hammer and sickle, or even under the name socialism, you may end up repelling people who, without those words, are going to be completely supportive of the substance of what you're trying to do, even if it's in a limited way. So my question to you with this book, which, one of what I think is I loved about it is because I have a ideologically diverse audience, I could always tell, it'd be like one paragraph where it'd be like, God, the left's going to hate that. And the right's going to really like it. And then the next paragraph would be, wow, the right's going to be, this is crazy. And the left is going to be like, okay, I'm back on board. Which I think is a good way to read a book if you're feeling unsettled, right? As opposed to in this like groove where nothing's bothering you and you know what's coming. But this to me is really the crux of
what we were just talking
what so
about.
many of these internecine battles are about is,
we predicted this conversation.
Is politics for you and the critique that you're making about trying to turn America into a country where a left-wing democratic socialist style movement can become the majority and emerge with that ideology dominant? Or is it about trying to find ways, given the complexity of the United States and the realities of what it is, and the importance of short-term gains, working with people who don't identify as being on the left or who don't like the word socialist or DSA as their label, but who nonetheless share those common interests to kind of build bridges and work, even if it's like on a case-by-case basis, to form majoritarian coalitions that can actually change the world, even if not in this like fundamental ideological way, but in a still concrete way that makes people's lives better.
Yeah, so I would say both, depending. I mean, like I think that the one place where I would throw in a note of caution, one part of what you said is about like the example about corporatism and corporate power, because I think at a sufficient level of generality, thanks, Charles,
you can get people from a lot of different perspectives to nod along with that kind of critique. But when it comes to solutions, you're going to get very, very different positions. And I think this is an important point to make, especially because right now you get people like Marco Rubio, for example, who like to take on a certain mantle of criticizing corporate America and so on. But then you kind of look at the details and say, okay, well, do you want to raise the minimum wage? No. Do you want to make it easier to organize labor unions? No. Do you want to get healthcare? No. So is it really just that sure, you might look at various things that corporate America does and say that have bad effects and say, well, that's bad, I disapprove of that. But I question how much that, and of course also in cases like Rubio, I don't like the fact that the culture war signaling is now not what I like. It's now like woke signaling. But when it comes to actual solutions, which is the part that matters, right? How's the way that we want to change the world? I think you're going to get much less alignment there. Now, that said...
Well, let me just interject really quickly there, because I do think there, like the classic case you always get is like, oh, Josh Hawley talks a good game about like populism and standing up to corporate power, which he does. Then you look at his 2018 record when he was running for the Senate against Claire McCaskill, and he voted for Trump's tax cut proposal on corporations, and Trump himself cut taxes. And so there's like this, obvious difference between the rhetoric of Republican populist leaders and their actions, just like there's oftentimes a lot of gap between the rhetoric even of left-wing populist leaders and their actions, right? Like the Squad having the opportunity to stop $2 billion in added spending for the Capitol Police and voting present instead of no and letting it pass. But I guess what I'm really, and I think the reason that happens is because when you're running for Senate, in order to get reelected, you need, $50 million in the bank or $100 million in the bank, which means you're constantly talking to corporate lobbyists and needing to serve them, which explains that disparity. But in terms of like ordinary people, voters or people who are angry,
people, I completely agree that there is lots of so I think that I would say, like, even in the Squad case, not that any of those people should be above criticism, or there aren't criticisms of them that I would agree with. I would make a little bit of a distinction between sort of maneuvering about how, when to pick which kinds of fights with the Democratic leadership, and actually having like stated policy preferences that are bad, right? Which some of those people might have on some issues. I think I do have some very real disagreements about free speech and other things, but I think that for the most part, that's more that category. I think that it is important to note, even among people who aren't elected politicians, right, that on a sort of leadership level, that there is this big gap that you're talking about. Like the example I always think about is Steve Bannon did a Monk debate a couple of years ago with David Frum. And it was a very hyped event. It's a big deal. And I watched that thing, and one of the things that really struck me is it was basically 2 hours of Frum, kind of throwing rhetoric at Bannon, insinuating he's a fascist, and Bannon throwing rhetoric at Frum about working class deplorables, but they didn't actually really get into any policy disagreements. And I question how much disagreement there really is. How much of that's just David Frum sort of thinks that this is an uncouth way of packaging preferences that he doesn't fundamentally disagree with. I really liked, by the way, which is one of the reasons, when the podcast Red Scare had Bannon on, and lots of people were mad at them for that, because Anna and Dasha were platforming Steve Bannon, which is the stupidest thing ever. We can get into that, but they have the platforming taboos. But one thing I loved about that interview is they kept pressing him on, okay, you're a populist, right? So why don't you support Medicare for all, right? I mean, wouldn't that be populist? And I think that's a more useful way to critique people like that. None of which is to say that I disagree either that one, there are some specific issues where I think, especially on a legislative level, there could be room for alliances with, if you have somebody like an unusual kind of libertarian Republican like Justin Amash, and you could do something about NSA spying or military spending, then sure, do it, right? I mean, I want elected leftists to accomplish things, and I have absolutely no problem with that. Or two, that I think that even though on that sort of level of pundits and politicians, I'm very skeptical about how populist, right when populists are. On the level of voters, yeah, I think there are tons of people who are in that box. People who might have socially conservative preferences on culture war issues, who might have other views that I wouldn't like, but who have like genuinely left-wing economic views. I think those absolutely are people like that, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier, by the way, because I think that part of like what made that reaction so insane, right? Like part of why, if, as was reported, AOC had such a bad reaction to the Rogan endorsement that was so misguided on her part of why certainly people who, granted, a lot of that controversy was ginned up by bad faith actors, supporters of other candidates, but I saw a lot of people with that, Democratic Socialist rose emoji, Twitter handle, who said, "Oh no, he really should not have accepted the endorsement of this terrible, problematic person, Joe Rogan." And part of what makes that so insane is that it undermines like the whole, a big part of the reason, to my mind, to trumpet from the rooftops that Joe Rogan said he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders is that it's proof of concept for a big part of the selling campaign of the Sanders campaign, which was, hey, there are people who wouldn't necessarily vote for any random Democrat who will vote for Bernie Sanders, even though he has good, positive, socially progressive, values about all of those things. There are people who might not vote for a Joe Biden or a Mayor Pete, who would vote for Bernie because his economic appeals resonate with them, which if your goal is to win is a huge selling point. And by the way, just side note on that, I think that I still think was a fundamentally correct argument. I think that Biden was saved by the pandemic. If COVID hadn't happened,
for sure, without doubt.
Elected.
Without doubt. Well, listen, Ben, I've been on your show, I think twice, maybe 3 times, and we always have a super long, interesting conversation. I think you're doing among the best work in grappling with the issues that need to be grappled with on the left. I think that anyone, including people not on the left, will profit a great deal from your book, in part because it shows how you can engage in difficult self-critique, not like superficial kind of self-critique, but like really harsh self-critique with the goal of winning. But I also think that people, when they listen to kind of honest, stripped down advocates of a particular faction, might realize that there are a lot fewer differences with that faction than they
do. You love that I can post a comment and it'll go over Nando's head.
To believe. So I want to encourage everybody to get it. Your YouTube show is always great. It's always this level of dialogue. So I encourage people to listen to that as well. I'm going to write up something, my kind of own reaction after having spoken with you. And I hope we keep the channel of dialogue open, and congratulations on the book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben.
Good shit.
Well, yeah, it's good. It was good. The exchange of ideas, high level exchange of ideas. I don't know.
Just one of Ben's last points there of just like the appeal of Bernie is that he can bring in people who like aren't like just liberals or aren't like, the left or whatever, that like he actually, because of his economic platform, can bring other people in. Like I remember making that point when I was talking, like I'm making a year and a half ago, and I'd forgotten about it because of everything that's happened. And hearing you say it again was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we're doing. Like that's the political project. Like that's why, like, not only are we morally correct, not only does our program actually benefit the vast majority of people, but like it actually remains a viable winning strategy in the here and now for that fact that like a lot of people who actually will benefit from this, and that we still have a ton of work of reaching out to those people and bringing them to our politics. And that's totally achievable. And like one of the best examples of that is the fact that like if you look at like an interview with Joe Rogan 20 years ago, he's like a stark raving libertarian. Like he has horrific reactionary views on things. This was like Connor Kilpatrick had an article where like he highlighted this, like the interview with Rogan from like the early aughts or the 19 or
Yeah,
90
I know what the thing Connor mentioned is, but finish your point, Nick.
Yeah, no, just the fact that like he can go from that where he's like denigrating like a socialist candidate on the Bill Maher show and saying you're an insane person, to now being like, yeah, Bernie's like commonsensical. Like that's it speaks to the massive transformation in society that's happened. And if Rogan can change his opinion, imagine like, you know, how amenable so many people across the country are to these things. And it's up to us to actually organize them and talk to them.
Yeah, to use a reference that Cale, you won't know, John Popper, the lead singer of Blues Traveler, was a lifelong right-wing libertarian and voted for Bernie Sanders. So yeah, he also took the Rogan path, so to speak. You know, Glenn's point about the words that you use. This is like the words that you use when you're making these kind of substantive critiques. Is something that I grapple with a lot, and I'm not saying that I am 100% convinced of what I'm about to say, but I understand like what he's getting at, that you have to kind of like package whatever it is you're saying in a way that is appealing to a certain kind of person who may be predisposed to disagree with you. It's a reason why I've always tried to like, you know, whenever I do stuff, I always try to like, you know, dress well and look good, you know what I mean? Because like if you're doing kind of like a critique of the system or whatever, and you already look like you're anti the system, you know, it makes it much easier to discredit you. That's actually an argument that Glenn made 15 years ago or something. That's why he always wears a suit and tie whenever he goes on cable news. He was like, if I'm going to challenge, you know, the biggest kind of structures of power, I don't want to like look like some fucking guy who's just like ranting about like the corporations, man, you know. And I find that argument persuasive, that you have to be appealing in some way. Like it's not just the strength of your arguments. There's more to it. And the word that he used as a kind of scary word that you should try to avoid if you're trying to convince people is the word socialism. And I understand why, because for at least, you know, again, when I was coming up, that word, it was like akin to like death camps, you know, like there's literally no difference from, it was just it's a total synonymous with death camps, millions of people killed. And that kind of propaganda has seeped into the minds of many Americans. But if we are to differentiate ourselves from liberals and from right-wing populists, which are not like Josh Hawley did not invent right-wing populism, certainly not in the United States and certainly not around the world. Ross Perot was a right-wing populist. There's, you know, Pat Buchanan and things like that.
Berlusconi is like the guy, right-wing populist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's very Trumpy in many ways, but yeah. But if you're going to like what the right-wing populists do is kind of hint at, you know, capitalism is the problem, and everyone kind of is miserable because of capitalism, but it's hard. They don't quite understand that, you know. So they hint at a kind of anti-capitalist pose, while not actually kind of, you know, doing anything to change the structures of capitalism. So if you're going to differentiate yourself from that and the liberals who are just like, if we just put more black people in Marvel movies, we'll solve all our problems. You have to challenge the concept of, you have to challenge capitalism, you know, like you have to. There's just no way around it. You know, it's the thing. It is the thing. And until we come up with a different word for the alternative to capitalism, socialism is the word we got. So we just got to make it cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also think, Megan Day made this point, like just in conversation, but I mean, I think that's who I'm getting this from, that like sometimes we slip into this sort of lazy way of defending the use of the word where like the conclusion's right, but the argument's not quite right, where we say like, well, you know, people who have like progressive political views are going to be called socialists regardless, so you might as well own it. And that's That's actually not a great argument because
Mayor Pete said that argument.
Yeah, well, that alone should tell you that it's not a great argument, right? Maybe
Yeah,
Mayor Pete made it, but but also, like, it's because I think if you think about it for a second, you could use that argument to defend like any kind of like radical sounding thing that like you might that there might be very good reasons not to use because it's not going to connect with most people or it's misleading or whatever. You say, oh well, the right will accuse you of being that regardless. You might as well say it, right? And it's like, well, no, right? Like because oftentimes it's like, no, I mean, sure, just because the right tries to hang something on you doesn't mean you should make it easier for them or that it won't make it worse if you make it easier for them. The reason to use the word socialist isn't like the Mayor Pete reason. It's that even though, yeah, it might be a little bit of a liability. I think like less than people might be worried about, like, but I think, it might be a little bit of a liability, but it's worth it because it's a, every now and again battles about words are worth fighting because what it signifies is important, that you have to take on the actual economic structure of society itself. And that's something that's worth the short-term political costs.
Right. Well, and all of these labels have a ton of mud on them, like because we've been fighting over this for quite a while. So like every label is going to have some bad shit on it. I mean, to Nando's point, I mean, like the presentation is probably going to give an argument with Cale Brooks and
it's the parents are at home. We can fucking party over here.
Yeah, Jay, I gotta still give him an argument.
He lost his argument. He went to go find one.
Yeah. I mean, but like the presentation is going to inevitably change because the presentation has to meet the moment that you're in, but the principles should never really change. Like the principles should change insofar as you realize, you refine them, you understand like what your actual, like why you're doing what you're doing, but that's going to change a lot less on the day-to-day, the year-to-year, epoch to epoch than like the actual what do you have to do to immediately like do politics right now and get people to take a position on something, to say actually yes I am in favor of this or no I'm not.
Yeah.
And socialism has the most venerable tradition of any intellectual or political tradition ever in human history of fighting for human decency and human rights and like in the well-being of the vast majority of people. Like, and we're, it's like we have to make the case. We have to say like, look at the history, or like here we're going to try to uncover as much as we can and give you as much convincing evidence as we can. But we should know on the left, we should be confident in our ideas and in our politics because we have the most venerable tradition. And if you want to know more, you have to do the fucking work. You have to like there is
it's like the Starship Troopers. Would you like to know more?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that it's because there is I think it's a winnable battle over the word, and I think it's one that's worth winning because again, it really is an important distinction. I mean, like, anti-corporatism or whatever and socialism don't actually mean the same thing.
Right.
And it's and the reason why socialism is a little bit of a scary word is because it has a connotation that, at least as we use it, is correct. That they were actually challenging like the fundamental economic structure of society. So I think in that particular case, you might as well lean into it, for other like slogans and stuff. Like, yeah, I don't think it's particularly worthwhile because there's no parallel thing. Like I think that India Walton, who just essentially won the election, to be mayor of Buffalo, unless the like write-in takes her down in the general, is like seems to be I mean, she's not perfect. There are criticisms you could make, but I mean, she seems to be like a pretty smart organizer, and she even though a lot of the things that she was talking about as far as the policing aspect went are the same things that defund activists are typically talking about their interviews, where she says, yeah, I don't think it's like, I think people will get the wrong idea, right? When we say defund the police, let's, let's not use that slogan, right? Because it's too mixed up with with like abolish the police, whatever. And she's talking about reallocating funds, having things so like the first call on a mental health situation isn't necessarily the cops, and all of that good stuff. That's like the good defensible core of what defund activists we're talking about. Is that particular slogan worth fighting about? No, probably not. But is socialism worth fighting? Is that terminology worth fighting about? Yeah, I think it is. The other thing I was just going to say, well, actually two things. One, I remember that Connor Kilpatrick article you're talking about, Cale, because the guy he's talking about, the socialist candidate, is somebody I actually knew, way back when. That would be my friend David McReynolds, who has since passed away. But he was the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2000, and he actually did. It's funny because he's such a footnote, but he actually did get more votes in Florida than the difference between Gore and Bush. But he
was at fault for the Iraq War.
Yeah, exactly. But I still like him.
I mean, we're hating on Rumsfeld on this fucking show, and really we should be bashing David McReynolds.
Exactly.
There's bad people on both sides, folks. You gotta punch in either direction.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we could argue about Nader voters, but I'm pretty sure nobody was. I'm pretty sure anybody who's voting for David McReynolds had already decided to vote third party, but when he was on the Bill Maher show in 2000, when Rogan was like yelling at him for being a crazy person, David was talking about a lot of the same, striking a lot of the same rhetorical notes that Bernie would in his two campaigns, and talking about Nordic social democracy and
Mm-hmm.
advocating single payer and stuff like that. I mean, David was more of a radical socialist than Bernie, but still. But anyway, yeah, good guy. He'd answer an email from some random person in the Socialist Party in Michigan, and he and I think I got high with him at a Socialist Party convention once. So I have fond memories of McReynolds, but but I guess the one thing I was going to say with regards to the disagreement with Glenn in the last few minutes about right-wing populism is that one point that I wish I had made that I didn't think to make in the moment, because I try to make it every time the subject comes up, is that it's not just that as a matter of fact there are no right-wingers with meaningful power or influence who are meaningfully economically populist. It's that there can't be. There could be maybe in certain situations and some developing nations, or some of the ex-Stalinist kleptocracies are a little bit the ruling local ruling class is weaker and things are a little bit more in flux. There might be a little bit more room for people like that to operate. But in a country like the United States, there's no fucking way ever that could happen. Yeah. And there's a structural reason for that. This is what the first time I interviewed Crystal Ball is what I was pushing her on. Also somebody I like, but I have, but the structural reason is look, let's say, our grandpa Bernie had been elected president, and he and a bunch of Bernie-crats, won around the same time or whatever. That doesn't mean that he magically could have been able to enact his entire program, in his first term or anything, because there'd be tremendous ruling class resistance to enacting that robust social democratic program he was running on. And if that was going to be overcome, how would it be overcome? Mm-hmm. And how would it even be overcome in all of those Democratic primaries? You'd have to win at lower levels, et cetera, much less anything more dramatic that might happen. And I think that there's just no path towards victorious social democracy in America that doesn't lie through a rebuilt and much more militant labor movement. But that could fill that role on the left. There's nothing that could fill that role an economically populist right that could overcome vested interests. That's why it's just hot air. It's meaningless when they say they want to take on corporate power somehow. How?
Yeah, I mean, if Bernie won, I mean, and he tried to, pass some quote unquote economically populist bill, the Hollies of the world and the Oren Casses of the world and the Rayhan Salams and all these people would be fucking opposing it. Like they'd twist themselves into knots to like figure out some reason why they like maybe in theory support the overall goals, but like there's this one thing in the bill that I can't support it. But I think what a lot of people, I mean, this is where the conversation becomes kind of nuanced, and I'm usually against nuance. I hate nuance. I think it's overrated. But
we're a big black and white show.
I'm a black and white baby, good or bad. I'm American, dude. I can, we are good guys and bad guys. But I think when a lot of people think of because of the sort of melding of social issues with material issues in politics that I was describing earlier, what I think a lot of people realize is that there are a lot of working class people who are kind of economically populist and socially conservative. That is a real social base that exists, not just in the United States, but in other places as well. And like in the recent terms, in recent times, Pedro Castillo, the guy who won in Peru, ran on a platform of economic populism and social conservatism. We played a clip on the Jacobin show where he was like on a show and they were like, "Do you support abortion?" He's like, "Fuck no." "Do you support gay marriage?" Like, "Are you fucking insane? I would never fucking do that." Like all that shit. But he like supports nationalizing the mines and redistributing that wealth to working people, and he won. So I think like that's the kind of thing that people are talking about. That is not the right-wing populism that we are seeing in the United States. It's just absolutely not the actual, like, how they used to say actual existing socialism or whatever. Like the actual existing right-wing populism that exists in the United States is not that at all. That is just not the case. So I think that it is true that that a kind of left but not like leading with wokeness thing is, I'm not saying you have to be like Pedro Castillo and be like, fucking no way, I would never, are you kidding? Like, that's disgusting. I would never support gay marriage. I'm not saying you have to do that, but like, if you're not like a left, but not kind of leading with woke, which is in a way what Bernie was, and one of the reasons why he was so popular. I do find that argument persuasive, that like the sort of woke plus economic populism is not that popular, but the economic populism with like the woke kind of just more in the secondary background thing as a sort of signaling, branding, whatever you want to call it, is quite popular. Right-wing populism, actual existing right-wing populism in the United States in 2021 is not a thing. And like you said, Ben, it'll never be a thing.
Right. And we're really fortunate that, in the US, it is so socially liberal that like a Bernie Sanders doesn't have to compromise. He doesn't have to have these like bad positions on social issues. Like he has really good positions on social issues. He's like good across the board.
Better than the other ones.
Right. But if you're on the left in Peru, you should be voting for Castillo, and not because you think he's like a morally perfect person. That's not why you do politics. You say this is an advancement of political ambitions and our political project, and it's imperfect. That's fine. You have to deal with imperfections in politics all the time, and you have to keep your principles close, and you have to try to do your best given really bad situations or imperfect situations or less than ideal choices or whatever. So again, if you're in Peru, there's no doubt, at least on my mind, that you vote for Castillo, you support Castillo. But then we're not in that situation in the US. We're very fortunate that we can support and vote for someone like Bernie Sanders. But it also is the case that in the US, like woke, this kind of it's kind of a catch-all term, but this like basically kind of like the social attitudes of a lot of the professionals that is oftentimes very condescending, because it doesn't actually like recognize the material degradation of most working class people of all different skin colors and genders and whatever else. That kind of stuff is toxic. Politically, it's unpopular, and it doesn't do well at the voting booth. And so it becomes even more obvious that, like, if you want to win, if you want to both like uphold like good, like if you want to be morally correct and you want to win, you don't support the fucking woke shit. You support the universal programs. You support the commonsensical, socially liberal attitudes that Bernie Sanders is putting forward for the most part. Like, like in some ways, like we were so goddamn fortunate that like Bernie Sanders was like the left revival in the U.S. Like I keep thinking, like, imagine if like Bernie didn't run and it was Elizabeth Warren, and like that's our model for like a left revival in 2016. Like it would be so much more degenerate. Like we are so fortunate that Bernie Sanders was the one who.
Yeah, he's a miracle.
Yeah,
he's kind of a miracle.
No, absolutely. And I should also, so I think there are a couple of things here that, I mean, obviously in Peru, that's one thing. I mean, it's not like, it's not like, if Fujimori had won, she was going to try to legalize same-sex marriage in Peru. To put it very mildly, right? I mean, like if anything, it was, Castillo was slightly better on that stuff because he would sort of express the social attitudes of working class Peruvians, which are not great, but he'd also say like, look, I'm a constitutional Democrat. If people do want this stuff, I'm open to it. Like I don't personally agree with it. But that's Peru. Fortunately, in the United States, we're in a vastly better position. And there's an article I really liked by Dino Costella called in last year, I guess it was a little over a year ago, called "We Need a Class War, Not a Culture War" in Jacobin. It was a response to.
Do we ever?
Yeah, well, I mean, the headline alone is great, but I mean, it's also like it was a response to a article by Angela Nagel and Mike Tracy where they've been there was like Nagel and Tracy's analysis of why Bernie lost, and Dino gives them credit for being right about certain things, but like pushes back against some of the cultural analysis and says, look at the polling data, like the actual like views of the majority of Americans are pretty socially progressive. Like this, where we don't, which is great, right? Because we don't have to certain kinds of trade-offs that people in other countries might have to worry about. We really don't have to worry about that much, like even on immigration, having path to citizenship and all that stuff, right? It's pretty good. Never mind, gay rights and abortion and all of that. So that's absolutely true. It is also true, by the way, that socially progressive on policy, like the winning combination is socially progressive on policy issues, but not like cloyingly woke, like in terms of cultural signaling, right? That's because most people, because despite the fact that most people have like decently progressive like policy preferences about cultural issues, like the vast majority of the population and guys, I mean, if you're watching this, you don't believe this, like look at the data or just like leave your house. Like the vast majority of the population can't stand the progressive cultural signaling, right? That's like people, like it's not
the language policing and the activisty language being used, and like they fucking hate that shit. Everyone hates that shit.
Yeah, well, I mean, and really specifically, I mean, I have I'm looking at some a survey that
got the data online. We're looking at the data right now.
Yeah, we're looking at the data, right? I mean, that's the 83% of respondents who make less than $50,000 a year dislike political correctness. And that's, and again, that doesn't mean that they have reactionary social positions, right? Like, I mean, obviously it's not.
They just don't want you to be fucking annoying about it.
Wait, Nando, your mic got a little frizzed up. You gotta.
Yeah.
What did I do?
Unplug, plug in your mic again, or like disconnect, reconnect.
Got the tech support right on the stream, which is good. But yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? I mean, it's not that they actually have like, you know, bad positions on anti-discrimination and reproductive rights. It's just that as Nando was trying to say in his weird robot voice because his mic was having trouble, you know, they just don't want you to be fucking annoying about it, you know, which is correct, right? I mean, like they don't, you know, you don't have to. You can have good positions on everything that has anything to do with meaningful racial justice and non-discrimination and affirmative action in the real world, but also hate Robin DiAngelo trainings. And in fact, that is like most people's.
That's the right position.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the correct position, also. You know, but like I think it's also happily. Right, the vast majority position. The correct position is not always the vast majority position, but in this case, it is. And so I think you end up having this like weird, this weird argument where everybody's wrong sometimes, where some people like really overestimate socially reactionary views in the American working class beyond what there's any evidence for statistically. On the one hand, and on the other hand, there's another group of people who says, "Oh, anybody who objects to annoying performative wokeness must just be like right wing on social issues." And it's like neither of those things are true.
Right. And DiAngelo is a good example because it's literally the shit that either your manager or your boss is forcing you to sit through. Like, it becomes a weapon in the hands of our enemies, of the ruling class, of the capitalist class, of your boss, of the managers that serve their interests. And then it gets beaten over our heads that we're told not only like, do you have to show up and do exactly what you're told every single day, stand here, you may or may not get a bathroom break, but you're also morally a bad fucking person because you have some imperfect ideas in your head. Like that's obviously people hate this shit. It's torture for so many people. Like it's humanizing.
I found it funny that they studied the effects of these anti-racist trainings and their ability to reduce racist attitudes amongst the people who are subjected to it is basically zero, or like essentially it has zero effect on that scale. The thing that it does do is it increases the hostility that people of a certain race, like if you're white, have towards poor people within your own race. they like when they're subjected to the Robin D, like if like some PMC white person is subjected to a Robin DiAngelo training, the takeaway they don't like reduce their own racism quotient, even if that were like some sort of like number that you can reduce. They increase their quotient of like I just fucking hate these hillbillies, man. They're the fucking worst.
Yeah. No.
I love it's in Ray Reid's book Towards Freedom, but originally was the chapter was originally a Catalyst essay. So I read this several years ago, but when he's talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates, towards the end, like he gets just shy of actually saying it clearly, like it explicitly, but it's so obviously there that like Coates and like that kind of like PMC, in this case, like the black PMC in the US, they just have so much contempt for like working class black people. It's just like they hate these people, and like Coates is not interested in like a politics that benefits the vast majority of black people. He's just so obvious. Like he has his own distinct class interests, and those are what he's pursuing. Like Coates is far more interested in like hanging with like the Paris Review of Books and shit. He does not care about like the material conditions of the vast majority of poor people broadly, but including black people. Like there's no racial solidarity. That just doesn't. That's not it's this concept you keep hearing, and obviously it's typically used for like white people. White. Sometimes you hear it like in American history of like white plantation owners like having solidarity with like white farmhands or like white yeoman farmers at the expense of like black slaves. It's not like it's so ahistorical and so wrong.
Total horseshit. The like in that case, like the effective rhetoric of Lincoln's Republican Party was about how the vast majority of the population did not have the same interests as the slave owners, and I mean, certainly, I mean, during the Jim Crow era, I mean, my God, I mean, it could not be further from the truth that that like, you know, Dixiecrats in the South, like who had actual power, you know, had some sort of racial solidarity with poor white people in the South. I mean, it's exactly the opposite. In Thomas Frank's last book, The People Know, he quotes this great speech from Martin Luther King, where King talks about how, like, historically the strategy of these like Southern, bourbon Democrat politicians to defeat the populist movement was to like whip up, you know, racial resentment as a way of disarming that, you know, and King has a great line in the speech about how what they're essentially being told is you have no food in your bellies, but you could eat Jim Crow.
Yeah. That's like that. It's you know, of course it's like a massive shame that like people like King, people like A. Philip Randolph, people like Rustin, like have been so thoroughly erased. And, you know, and I like, just to totally honest, like I take it as a responsibility as part of like a media person on the left, as part of Jacobin. It's like, it's my responsibility to like bring back that legacy, because like that's the only way out when we're dealing with like American race politics, when we're dealing with just class politics in America. Like it's like our greatest Americans. I mean, Bernie Sanders is number one, we all know. But like after that, it's like A. Philip Randolph, and like and you know, but no one learns about him, because who would be the one teaching us about A. Philip Randolph? Like it's us. We're gonna do more. I promise. I'm sorry. I'm doing a growth.
What happened there?
Cale just got embarrassed because he got too like sincere, and he got too like passionate and was yelling, so he just got embarrassed and shut his camera off. He did a growth. That's how you learn.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
That's how you learn.
He's making space for other bodies and voices.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. No. Yes. But yeah, no, for sure. Right. And I mean, I think about that all the time. Right. I mean, if Bayard Rustin was alive right now, he would absolutely, you know, be accused of being a class reductionist, you know, because he correctly thought that universalist economic appeals, you know, were the best way to redress the extreme poverty, you know, that Black people in the United States, you know, were disproportionately in, you know, or King, or, you know, or any of these people, at least if they maintained their politics as they were in the 60s.
The fact that the criticism of Bernie that he is somehow bad on race, or the thing you heard a lot, is that he doesn't know how to talk to Black people. That was like the common refrain. The fact that
which is such a weird, condescending, racist way to put it anyway, right? It's like,
so, I mean, I saw him do the fist bump. Remember that GIF or is it GIF of him doing the,
when he daps the guy?
Yeah, it's amazing. He's like, it's like white person shake hand, and the Black guy, he does like a perfect, like, you know.
Yeah, and then the guy turns around and is like,
yeah, he's like, wow, that was.
I think Amber takes credit for the first person to gift that moment, but.
Oh, really? That's good. Yeah. I mean, it's the fact that critique stuck is such an indictment on so many things. Like, it's just so many people should be ashamed of themselves to smear that man as somehow like a crypto racist. Like, it's just it is a full-on kind of fantasy land. What?
The organizer in the civil rights movement.
You got arrested during the fucking civil rights movement, fucking, in college and shit. Like, I was not getting arrested in college for nobody. I'm sorry. Fuck that. You know, like, are you crazy? Yeah. No, it's that whole thing is like, will live long in my memory as like just an absolute low point of a certain kind of political pose. That like, yikes! Look what Bernie. Ooh, ow! You know, ouch.
Yeah, well, it's especially awesome because like all the people who said shit like that, like every single one of them, like ultimately, when the primary came down to Bernie and one other person, they all backed that other person because we all know that if there's one person who has like really good, sensitive views about racial justice and can really talk in a well-informed way about the experiences of Black people, it's Joe Biden.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, yeah, he's the least woke guy in the universe. I mean, that's like the irony of like the Biden victory that I find kind of some Schadenfreude in. That Biden himself is like the least woke guy like in the world. You
all the people who pretended that the reason they weren't going to vote for Bernie was that he was an old white man. It's like, well, we found a old white man about the same age, but like way further gone mentally, and like also with a history of making weird, ambiguously racist comments, and and very touchy and whatever. And it's like, no,
like supporting busing or not supporting busing.
Not supporting busing.
No, he gave the fucking eulogy at Strom Thurmond's funeral. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And he definitely thinks like, Thai people are all like agendered or something. And, just,
That last one might have been a little bit of improv.
He doesn't actually believe that. I mean, he probably does, but the fact that he spoke, that he gave the eulogy for Strom fucking Thurmond.
Yeah, right. I was going to say the one moment I did find sort of charming was when somebody asked Biden how many genders there were, and he's like, I don't know, at least 3.
At least 3.
He's not wrong.
Yeah, which is like it's a good but it's like good because he's like both not taking the bait and like not saying the like obnoxious reactionary thing they want him to say, but also signaling that it's like, why are you asking me this? I don't
even know.
I don't care about anything you're talking about right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he was opposed to busing. He gave the eulogy at Strom Thurmond's funeral. He bragged about how he worked with like segregationists. He
need a Hill trial. I mean, it just goes on.
etc. Right? I mean, like he's, but it's like, no. I mean, the guy who's the Jewish social democrat with the long history of support for anti-discrimination efforts from like when he was arrested in the civil rights movement and when he was in college, to when he was like the mayor of Burlington, and he was actually like remarkably, like he was like actually talking about like trans rights in Burlington in the 1980s. It's like that guy. Yeah,
Yikes!
Yikes!
Yeah, greatest American who's ever lived.
The non-yikes option is Joe Biden. I think that should tell you everything that you ever need to hear about whether to listen to any of these people ever again. Or, by the way, all of the the people that I knew from academia over the years who were like who were supporting Elizabeth Warren even when she was clearly being a wrecker against the Bernie campaign for absolutely no reason except that she reminded them of themselves. Because if
they lied about their race to become an academic.
Yeah, well, that too. But like,
if you vote for her, she can win. That shit.
That it's like, oh, she seems like she's really a policy wonk. She has plans. Which is all a way of saying.
I used to always love when Michael Brooks would say, like, "Oh, she's got some blog posts."
yeah, she has Medium posts. Like I remember him telling me, it's like at first I was confused when I heard people talk about the plans. Surely they don't mean these 5-page Medium posts, but that's like, no, literally that's what they mean by plans is Medium posts. And
these people are like fucking children.
But the fact that she called them plans. And did some spread around just a little bit of a touch of like an aura of nuance was enough to send policy wonky signals that like, oh, this is a person who really does her homework and she's like a credentialed, striving like person like you. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly why she wouldn't have won, because she reminds everybody else of you too. Yeah. And nobody else likes that. So anyway, I know we got to go. And I have like people. I remember around 2017, people started saying, we should stop relitigating the 2016.
Never. I never will.
No, I'm going to keep relitigating these two primaries until the day I die. So, everybody should just be aware of that.
I mean, we might get socialism, and we're still talking about this. So
there will literally be global workers' control of the needs of production. And we're going to be going out to the like the three of us are going to be going out to the cooperatively owned bar where they're maybe we're in the last stages if you still have to use money at the bar.
Yeah.
And it's the conversation's going to be like, oh my God, do you remember fucking Mayor Pete?
Do you remember when fucking Hillary said that breaking up the banks and racism?
Exactly.
This a little slightly more personal. When I saw Matt Karp and a few others for the first time in person in the last few months, one of the first things we started talking about was Super Tuesday and the primary, and it's oh yeah, we just picked up literally where we left off a year ago when we went into lockdown. We still had to keep going, and we're gonna keep going because I don't know, it's important.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
This is a good blog post. Read the good blog post.
Yes, the good blog post. It's at Verso. Verso's website. It's called Reagan, the Right, and the Working Class. So read that. And if you like the work that we're doing here, become a patron. Patreon.com/Ben Burgis. Watch Nando on Saturdays at 1:00 on the Jacobin channel for
Cale
and Cale, yes, to a lesser extent.
Sure.
Yep. So yeah, watch that and thank you guys again. Peace.
Later.
Bye. Good night.